The air in the throne room of Castle Volkov hung thick and cold, smelling of stale dust, ancient stone, and a faint, coppery scent of old blood. It was the only place in the world where the moonlight truly felt like a solid weight, pressing down on the shoulders of the living. A solitary figure, a man who looked woefully out of place in the Gothic grandeur, stood defiant beneath the gaze of the castle's mistress. This was Caelan Stone, and he was not supposed to be here. Not alive, anyway. He wore reinforced black leather, the kind favored by those who hunt the things that hunt others, and his eyes, a sharp, unyielding gray, were fixed on the woman on the dais. She was everything the legends promised: ethereal, terrifying, and dangerously beautiful. Her gown was black velvet that seemed to absorb the weak light, and a heavy, deep crimson cape pooled around the ornate, high-backed throne. Her skin was the pale, flawless white of mountain snow, contrasting sharply with the long, silver-white hair that cascaded over her shoulders. But it was her eyes that held the true terror, two glowing rubies that promised both infinite power and eternal damnation. This was Serafina Volkov, the Blood Moon Princess, and she was amused. "You'd never survive a night." Serafina's voice was a soft, liquid whisper that nevertheless echoed through the massive chamber, carrying the weight of centuries. Her lips curved into a slow, unsettling smile that revealed the slightest hint of elongated canines. Her enormous, charcoal-black wings, edged in a terrifying crimson, twitched slightly, stirring the heavy air. "You are human, fragile. Your pulse is a frantic drum in this silence. The very air you breathe belongs to the night, and the night belongs to me." Caelan didn't flinch. He didn't even shift his weight. The man standing opposite a creature of myth, a known slayer of mortals, should have been paralyzed by fear. Instead, he simply lifted his chin, that small, almost arrogant gesture of absolute confidence that had served him well in the shadows of the world. He reached up with his gloved hand and gently adjusted the neck of his jacket, a movement designed to show how utterly unconcerned he was. "Let's test that," Caelan replied, his voice a low, gravelly counterpoint to her silky tones. The words were not a threat, but a statement of undeniable fact, spoken with the calm certainty of a man who knows his own worth. "I didn't cross a continent, dodge your sentinels, and walk straight into your drawing room just to prove I'm scared, princess. I'm here because I want something you possess, and I'm willing to bet my life that I can take it." A ripple of low, murmuring sound went through the shadows that lined the perimeter of the room. Serafina's court, ancient, pale vampires wrapped in silk and malice, had been silent observers, but Caelan's sheer audacity was too much even for their cold composure. They were her generals, her advisors, her pets, and they looked at Caelan with a mixture of hunger and utter disbelief. Serafina raised a hand, and the murmuring ceased instantly. Her gaze narrowed, not in anger, but in calculation. A human, a mere mortal, had managed to bypass the impenetrable defenses of Castle Volkov, a feat that had not been accomplished in living memory. She was intrigued. "You interest me, Caelan Stone," she finally said, pronouncing his name with a slight, beautiful roll of the R. "Tell me, before I permit my loyal Lord Malachi to dispose of your corpse, what is it that you think you can take from me? A scroll? A jewel? The pathetic life of another mortal fool." A tall, impeccably dressed vampire with a severe, handsome face and a posture of rigid loyalty stepped forward from the shadows. This was Lord Malachi, Serafina's most trusted, and perhaps most possessive, advisor. He looked at Caelan with unconcealed disdain, his eyes flashing momentarily red. "My queen, this insolence must be met with swift destruction," Malachi hissed, his voice sharper and less pleasant than Serafina's. "He taints the air of the castle." Serafina ignored him, keeping her hypnotic eyes on Caelan. "The price of admission to your castle, princess, is what I seek," Caelan stated plainly. "I want something taken from me years ago. Something that only a creature of your power could return. I need the life of a child you stole, Serafina, my niece. Bring her back to the land of the living, and you get my life, should I fail to survive your rules." The silence that followed was so profound it hurt the ears. Caelan's request was not for treasure, but for a resurrection, a true impossibility. Serafina leaned back slowly on the throne, the movement graceful and predatory. She let the tension build for several agonizing heartbeats, her mind clearly working through probabilities and risks. Her ruby eyes seemed to drink in Kaelin's essence, searching for the weakness that must surely exist. She found only a terrifying, stubborn will. A bold request, Hunter, she mused. The dead do not return to life at my whim, even my power has its limits. But your offer is stimulating. The life of a renowned hunter, Kaelin Stone, in exchange for a fairy tale. I rarely find myself bored, but you offer a unique diversion. She stood up, and the sight of her full height, framed by the enormous wings, was breathtakingly intimidating. She descended the few steps of the dais, moving with a silent, fluid grace until she stood mere feet from him. Kaelin could feel the cold, unnatural air radiating from her skin. Here is my counteroffer, Seraphina whispered, her breath brushing his ear, an intimate invasion that sent a shiver down his spine despite his resolve. My court wishes to see you bleed. I am tired of merely watching them feast. I want to be entertained. Survive 30 full nights in Castle Volkov. You will be provided a single room, but nothing more. You will not leave the castle grounds. You must evade my court, my traps, and my hunger. If you survive until the next blood moon, the 30th night, I will use every ounce of my true, ancient power to grant your wish, no matter the cost to myself. If you fail, I claim your soul and your blood, and I will wear your skin as a testament to your folly. She extended a pale, sharp-nailed hand towards him, her thumb stroking the back of his wrist where his pulse hammered furiously beneath the leather glove. Her eyes glowed brighter, a promise of both pleasure and pain. Do we have an agreement, Kaelin Stone? Kaelin felt the sheer force of her will, the seductive pull of her vampiric energy, trying to compel him. But he was a hunter, and he had stared down worse creatures. He forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, a defiant grin of a man walking willingly into the jaws of death. He looked at her, then glanced past her at the furious face of Lord Malachi and the hungry eyes of the vampire court. He was alone, surrounded, and the odds were beyond impossible. Agreed, princess, Kaelin said, his voice firm. Let the test begin. Seraphina's smile widened, an expression of pure, dark delight. The game had begun. The hunter was now the prey in the ultimate, deadly experiment. The guard changed immediately. Lord Malachi, radiating cold fury, gave a clipped, almost violent nod to two towering figures in dark, archaic armor. They moved with a disturbing silence, their forms melting out of the shadows to flank Kaelin. This was no longer a polite audience. He was now a prisoner and a spectacle. Kaelin felt the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The casual predatory interest of the court had sharpened into anticipation. They weren't just watching. They were waiting for the first sign of weakness. Seraphina remained on the floor of the dais, her crimson eyes tracking Kaelin's every minute movement. She was studying him, assessing the resilience of the toy she had just acquired. Take him to the South Tower quarters, Seraphina commanded, her voice dropping the theatrical flourish for a tone of brisk authority. Ensure the chamber is locked from the outside. No access to the courtyard, and certainly no access to any of my kitchens. He is to survive on his own ingenuity. His survival is his sustenance. Understood, Malachi? Lord Malachi bowed stiffly, his resentment palpable. Understood, my queen. Though I advise against granting him even that minimal space. He is a trained killer, and a caged animal is the most dangerous. Precisely, Seraphina purred, a dark amusement sparkling in her gaze. I do not want a docile lamb, Malachi. I want a worthy opponent. Let us see how sharp his teeth are when the cage is made of iron and centuries of stone. The two armored vampires, who Kaelin instantly recognized as the Strigoi, vampires of pure brute strength and limited intelligence, motioned for him to move. Kaelin offered Seraphina one last look, a look that held both a challenge and a promise of trouble, before he turned and was escorted out of the throne room. The heavy, carved doors slammed shut behind him with a resonant thud that sealed his fate within the castle's suffocating embrace. The journey through the castle was a lesson in Gothic claustrophobia. The corridors were endless, the air stale and thick with the history of violence. Tapestries depicting forgotten battles hung like shrouds, and every window was either too high or too narrow to offer any comfort of the outside world. Kaelin used the transit time not for fear, but for observation. He memorized the turns, the placement of the torches, the subtle shift in floorboards, anything that could be a landmark or a weakness. The Strigoi guards were strong but mechanical, predictable targets if it came to a fight. They finally arrived at the South Tower. The room was Spartan, heavy stone walls, a narrow cot with a threadbare blanket, and a single, high window crossed with iron bars. There was a stone wash basin and an old, cracked mirror, which, Kalen noted with professional interest, did not reflect the two guards standing behind him, confirming they were indeed purely undead. One of the Strigoi pointed towards the cot. Kalen walked in without hesitation. He turned to face them as the lock on the outside of the thick oak door ground shut with a loud, definitive clank. He was trapped. Kalen ran a quick, practiced hand over his own body, confirming the presence of his necessary tools. He was stripped of all conventional weaponry the moment he was captured. No silver stakes, no holy water, no garlic. But the hunter always carried his true arsenal within the structure of his clothing. A microfilament garrote woven into the wrist lining of his glove, several razor-thin ceramic blades hidden in the heels of his boots, and a small vial of a concentrated sedative, potent enough to slow the metabolism of even a strong vampire, tucked into a specially sewn seam in his jacket. His mind, however, was his most dangerous weapon. He moved to the window. It was small, set high above the floor, and overlooked a sheer drop onto the castle's outer wall, beyond which lay a densely packed, hostile forest. The iron bars were thick, old, and set deep in the stone. No escape that way. Kalen knew his survival depended on understanding his enemy's mind. Seraphina hadn't just caged him, she had challenged his pride. He wasn't supposed to sit and wait, he was supposed to try and break out. The first test would come on the first night. Kalen settled onto the floor, his back against the cool, damp stone wall. He didn't sleep. He entered a state of profound stillness, monitoring the subtle sounds that permeated the stone. The slow, rhythmic tread of the Strigoi outside his door. The distant, mournful howl of something inhuman in the forest. And the almost inaudible, persistent whispers of the castle itself, the sounds of ancient secrets moving through its veins. Hours passed. The shift from day to the deep, oppressive darkness of the vampire's midnight was marked by the change in the moon's glow outside his window. Tonight, the moon was only a sliver, but the air felt charged, expectant. Then the test began. It wasn't the sound of the door opening, but the chilling, deliberate silence that preceded it. The rhythmic pacing outside stopped. The subtle sounds of the castle's life evaporated. Everything went dead quiet, the silence becoming a physical pressure against his eardrums. Kalen didn't move. He had already calculated his position. The cot was against the far wall. The door was the only access point. Moving would simply turn him into a sitting target. He relied on the darkness and the arrogance of his attacker. The lock groaned. Slowly, painstakingly, the heavy wooden door was pushed inward, revealing a gap just wide enough for a slender form to slip through. It wasn't Seraphina. It was a younger vampire, a female with wild, dark curls and eyes that shone with the feral excitement of a true hunter. She was lithe, quick, and she moved as silently as smoke. She expected to find him huddled, terrified, or asleep. Kalen waited until her second step inside the room, when her focus was entirely on the center of the floor. He sprang from the wall, not towards her, but towards the corner opposite the door, using the momentum to throw a heavy, unseen object. It was the stone wash basin. The basin crashed against the wall next to the door jamb with a loud, unexpected crack, shattering the silence and sending shards of ceramic and stone flying. The sudden noise and distraction were enough. The young vampire hesitated for a fatal half-second, turning her attention to the source of the noise. That was all Kalen needed. He covered the distance between them in a desperate lunge, not aiming for a kill, but for a disruption. His left arm shot out, not to strike, but to wrap the microfilament garrote around the door handle, pulling it toward the frame with sudden, sharp force. His right hand plunged into his jacket seam, retrieving the small vial. The vampire hissed, realizing the trap. Her claws extended, aiming for his throat. But Kalen was faster. He rammed his shoulder into her chest, knocking the air out of her ancient lungs and driving her hard against the closing door. He simultaneously smashed the ceramic vial against her collarbone. The highly concentrated sedative, designed to absorb through the skin on contact, was instantly effective. The vampire gasped, a choked, rattling sound, her ruby eyes widening in shock. Her limbs began to tremble violently, and the manic strength drained out of her in seconds. She slid down the door, unconscious before her body hit the cold stone floor. Silence returned, this time absolute. Kalen was breathing hard, his heart finally doing the frantic drumming Serafina had mentioned. He had won the first round, but the sound of the struggle would have surely alerted the outside guards. He listened intently. Nothing. The sound of the struggle must have been muffled by the thick door and the remote location of the tower. He quickly dragged the unconscious body of the vampire into a deep shadow behind the cot, hoping her scent wouldn't instantly betray his deception. He checked the body. No identifying marks, just the clothes of a dedicated predator. He retrieved the ceramic shrapnel and the broken vial, clearing the area meticulously. He knew he had bought himself precious hours, maybe even the rest of the night, if the Strigoi were as simple-minded as they seemed. They would assume the dead silence meant the hunter had been successfully dispatched. Kalen settled back against the wall, but this time, he didn't relax. He had survived 1 hour of the first night. He still had 29 more days to go, and he knew his next attacker would not be so careless. Serafina was watching, and he had just proven he was more than a fragile mortal. He had proven he was worth the hunt. The long, agonizing wait until dawn was a silent siege. Kalen sat in the darkness, alert, listening to the strained silence outside his door. He had successfully neutralized the threat, but that success was a liability. The vampire he had subdued, hidden beneath the cot, would be missed eventually, but Kalen counted on the arrogance of the court. They would assume the hunter was killed and consumed, and perhaps the Strigoi guards would simply assume the dispatched vampire was careless with her meal. As the first faint, bruised light of the sun began to filter through the narrow, barred window, a painful, distant promise of warmth, the lock outside groaned again. The door opened with more confidence this time, not a stealthy crack, but a bold, purposeful push. Standing in the doorway was Serafina Volkov herself. She was no longer wearing the heavy velvet gown of the throne room. Her attire was simpler, yet more dangerous, a fitted black ensemble of leather and fine chainmail that emphasized her sharp, athletic physique. Her wings were folded tightly against her back, making her look less like a distant monarch and more like a focused, lethal warrior. She stepped into the room, her expression unreadable, radiating a cold intensity that filled the small space instantly. Lord Malachi stood stiffly in the corridor behind her, his gaze sweeping the room, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. Serafina's ruby eyes went directly to the cot, then to the clean, undisturbed corner where Kalen sat. She moved gracefully, stopping a few feet from him, her gaze raking over the room's sparse details. She paused where the young vampire had fallen, then looked at the washbasin's empty space on the wall, and finally, her eyes locked onto Kalen's. A clever misdirection, Serafina stated, her voice devoid of emotion, yet carrying a dangerous undertone. The scent of blood lingers, Kalen Stone. But the blood is not yours. The body is gone. You are alive. My sweet, overly eager young Lysandra is missing. Kalen pushed himself to his feet, a slow, deliberate motion designed to convey control. He wasn't foolish enough to think he had escaped the attention of a creature like Serafina. He had only delayed her curiosity. I didn't kill her, Kalen replied, his voice calm. Killing your servants wasn't part of the agreement, princess. Survival was. She made her move, I made mine. I merely put her to sleep until the sun decides it's safe for her to wake up. Serafina's pale lips twitched. Sedation? Ingenious. And where is she now, my resourceful hunter? You couldn't have carried her out of the castle. Kalen simply pointed to the cot. Under the bed, in the deepest shadow. She won't trouble you until the moon is high again. Serafina actually laughed, a low, husky sound that was surprisingly human, yet still laced with a chilling menace. It wasn't a sound of genuine joy, but of appreciation for a good performance. You have spirit, Kalen Stone. I was told you were proficient, but I didn't expect such immediate success. You survived the first night, a feat in itself. Congratulations. 1 down, 29 to go. She stepped closer, invading his personal space, forcing him to hold his ground. But tell me, why did you save her life? Compassion? Sentimentality? These are fatal flaws in my world. No, Kalen met her gaze, his gray eyes steady against her red ones. Strategy. If I kill her, you send a predator. If I let her live and simply disarm her, you send a lesson. You see that I'm not just muscle. You see that I have a mind, and that mind will be your most challenging prey. Serafina studied his face, her expression turning serious. She raised a sharp-nailed hand, not to strike, but to lightly touch the faint line of a scar that ran along his jaw. The touch was ice-cold and unsettlingly intimate. You play a high-stakes game, Hunter. You ask for a life, yet you wager your own against me. What is the wish, truly? Why risk eternal damnation for a life that is already lost? The wish is simple, Kalen murmured, resisting the urge to pull away from her unnerving touch. It's about fixing a failure. The girl, my niece, was stolen because I was too slow. I failed to protect her. My survival is the only currency I have left to buy her back. And you are the only one with the magic powerful enough to attempt it. Noble, Serafina scoffed, dropping her hand. And predictable. That is your only flaw, Kalen. Your morality. You should worry less about redemption and more about surviving the day. My court, led by Malachi, will be furious at your survival and Lysandra's humiliation. They will not be so careless next time. Lord Malachi, who had been listening from the door, finally spoke, his voice tight with controlled anger. I assure you, Queen Serafina, the next attempt will be orchestrated by me. It will be swift, and it will not involve any unnecessary theatricality. This human will not survive the second night. Serafina glanced over her shoulder at Malachi, a slow smile returning to her face. You hear that, Kalen? My court is now fully invested in your demise. The game is becoming much more interesting. She turned back to Kalen, her expression softening infinitesimally, revealing a flicker of something dangerously close to admiration. A true hunter understands his terrain. Since you've proven yourself intelligent enough to survive a single night, I will give you a single concession. You are permitted to roam the central, non-private sections of the castle during the daylight hours. My court sleeps during the day, so you are safe from their teeth. But you must be back in this room before the sun sets. If you are not, I will hunt you myself, and I promise you, my hunt is inescapable. She didn't wait for his reply. With a final, lingering look that felt like a brand, Serafina turned and swept out of the room, Lord Malachi following immediately, the heavy door slamming shut behind them. Kalen listened as the lock clicked. He was breathing easily now, the tension of the confrontation receding. He walked to the window and watched the gray sky. Serafina hadn't given him a concession, she had given him a tool. To survive 30 nights, he couldn't just hide. He needed to understand the castle's layout, its weaknesses, and its secrets. He needed to find the source of Serafina's power, the magic capable of granting his impossible wish. He waited until the sun was fully up, casting a weak, cold shaft of light through the bars. He knelt down, pulled Lysandra's unconscious body out from under the cot, and carefully leaned her against the wall in the light. She wouldn't be happy when she woke up, but at least she would live. Kalen then opened his door. The Strigoi guards were gone, replaced by the silence of the sleeping castle. The game of survival had just turned into a dangerous game of exploration and espionage. Kalen Stone had 29 days to uncover the weakness of the Blood Moon Princess and her fortress. The castle during the day was a study in contrasts. The menacing shadows of the night retreated, replaced by a dust-moted, sepulchral silence. The air was stale, still bearing the cold breath of the night's inhabitants, but the oppressive sense of being watched had lifted. It was quiet, and in that quiet, Kalen Stone found his footing. He stepped out of the south tower, his ears straining for the slightest sound. The Strigoi guards were gone, and the heavy doors to the exterior were sealed shut. His range of movement was technically limited to the central, non-private sections, a vague term that he intended to stretch to its absolute limit. Kalen began his systemic search, moving with the practiced stealth of a predator accustomed to navigating hostile territory. He started with the main galleries, noting the high ceilings and the thick, blood-red velvet drapes that kept the weak sunlight at bay. The art hanging on the walls wasn't typical portraiture. It was a morbid catalogue of the Volkov lineage, depicting ancestors in various states of predatory grandeur, often with a frightened, pale mortal cowering at their feet. The history here was one of dominance and cruelty, a history Serafina was born into, but one Kalen suspected she wore like a heavy chain. He moved into the massive library, a cavernous chamber lined floor to ceiling with ancient, leather-bound tomes. This was where Kalen felt the first true stirring of purpose. Information was power, and Serafina had unwittingly given him access to her family's collective knowledge. He didn't read the titles, he scanned the spines, looking for specific patterns. Texts on blood rituals, necromancy, and political histories of the ruling houses. Most of the books were written in archaic languages, but one small section, clearly a later edition, contained journals and treatises in a more modern hand. One book, bound in simple, weathered gray hide, stood out. It was a private chronicle, labeled only with a Roman numeral V. Kalen recognized the crest on the cover, the Volkov bat sigil, but inverted. He quickly tucked the book beneath his jacket. Stealing was dangerous, but essential. Next, he examined the castle's infrastructure. He found the kitchens, a vast, stone room dominated by massive, cold hearths and long, unused preparation tables. Serafina had cut off his food supply, but she hadn't cut off his access to water. He located the cisterns, noting the complex piping system that ran beneath the castle. He also found a small, secondary larder used for storing spices and herbs, some of which Kalen recognized as having strong sedative properties, a potential backup to his dwindling ceramic vial if he could process them. As he explored a long, winding back staircase, he overheard a low, hissing argument coming from a heavy wooden door. It was faint, but Kalen's trained ears caught the distinct voices of two of Serafina's court, a male and a female, not Malachi, but close allies of the Lord. She risks all for a foolish game, the male voice spat, laced with contempt. The blood moon is close. Her focus should be on the ascension, not on this pathetic human toy. Malachi is right to be worried, the female voice replied, sharper. She hasn't tasted blood in weeks, not the pure, life-affirming kind. This human is testing her control, and that is a danger to the entire line. The prophecy requires her to be uncompromised. Kalen froze on the staircase, digesting the words. The blood moon. Ascension. Prophecy. Serafina's deadly game was not just for her amusement. It was tied to a larger, imminent event, and Kalen's presence was a disruption to her necessary focus. Her vulnerability wasn't just her desire for entertainment. It was a deeper conflict between her duty to her lineage and her personal distraction. He retreated silently, his mission now twofold: survive the nightly attacks and decipher the meaning of the blood moon ascension. This was Serafina's weakness, the tightrope she was walking, and he needed to understand how to use it to save his niece without destroying Serafina in the process, a destruction he found himself increasingly unwilling to guarantee. He returned to the South Tower just as the ambient light began to change, taking on the bruised, violet hue that signaled the sunset. He secured the door from the inside with a crude wedge fashioned from a piece of old, broken furniture he had found. It wouldn't hold against the full strength of a vampire, but it would buy him a critical 3 seconds. Once locked in, Kalen pulled out the gray-bound chronicle. He flipped through the pages. The handwriting was elegant, precise, and filled with a cold, clear voice that spoke of duty and sorrow. The journal belonged to Vasilisa Volkov, Serafina's ancestor, detailing the immense strain of the Crimson Vow, a ritual sacrifice required of the ruling queen on the night of the blood moon to maintain the family's power. As the final light faded and the Strigoy's heavy footsteps began their slow patrol outside his door, Kalen read the entry for the coming blood moon. The truth of the ascension was far darker than a simple power grab. It was a final, damning step into eternal darkness, one that required the voluntary sacrifice of the queen's remaining humanity. And Serafina, the journal hinted, was fighting against it. The second night arrived with a chilling precision. Kalen had braced himself, not just for a physical confrontation, but for a psychological one. He knew Malachi would not repeat Lysandra's mistake. The attack wouldn't be about brute hunger, it would be about lethal efficiency. Kalen had moved the cot, created a small choke point near the door, and armed himself with his ceramic blades, strategically placed for immediate retrieval. He was reading the journal entry on the Crimson Vow, absorbing the chilling details of Serafina's looming destiny, when the first sign of the assault manifested. It wasn't the sound of the lock, nor the opening of the door. It was the air itself. A profound, unnatural drop in temperature, followed by the faint, almost imperceptible scent of iron and ozone. Then instead of the door, the stone of the ceiling directly above him began to crumble. Malachi had not attacked the fortifications. He had breached the structural integrity of the castle, choosing a flanking maneuver. A large section of the ceiling plaster exploded inward, showering Kalen with dust and debris. Kalen rolled violently off his position, avoiding the immediate collapse. Descending through the breach, not with brute force, but with a controlled, elegant drop, was Lord Malachi. He landed silently, his black boots barely dusting the stone floor. He was not alone. Behind him, standing on the edge of the large hole, were two of his most loyal, heavily armored court members. They would cut off retreat while Malachi engaged. Amusing, Malachi hissed, his voice dangerously smooth. You actually believed the princess's flimsy challenge allowed for survival? It was meant to be a swift execution, Hunter. But you chose to delay. Now you pay the price for that arrogance. Malachi didn't waste time on conversation. He moved faster than Kalen had anticipated, a blur of dark-tailored fabric. Kalen barely registered the movement before Malachi's strike, a precise, bone-jarring kick aimed at his ribcage. Kalen blocked it with his forearms, the impact sending a spike of blinding pain up to his shoulder. Malachi's strength was far beyond Lysandra's. It was the power of centuries of cultivation. Kalen retaliated immediately, ignoring the pain. He sprang back, using the momentum to draw one of his ceramic blades. The non-metallic nature of the blade made it undetectable until it was too late. He feinted high and struck low, aiming for the tendon in Malachi's knee. Malachi was too fast. He didn't just dodge. He vanished, reappearing instantly behind Kalen. Malachi grabbed Kalen's arm, twisting it with devastating force, disarming him of the blade, which clattered uselessly on the stone floor. Ineffective, Malachi sneered, his breath cold on Kalen's neck. I know you're kind, mortal. Your little trinkets mean nothing against true power. Just as Malachi prepared the killing blow, intending to crush Kalen's spine, Kalen executed the unexpected. He didn't fight the twist, he amplified it. He dropped his weight, wrenching his shoulder, and head-butted Malachi in the face with savage force. The impact wasn't enough to injure the vampire, but it was enough to stagger him. Kalen broke free and scrambled towards the only piece of heavy cover, the stone chimney piece. He grabbed the chronicle he had hidden moments before and placed his back against the stone, breathing hard. You're fighting your queen's fight, Malachi, Kalen gasped, using the brief reprieve to regain his composure. She wants entertainment. You want my corpse. You're undermining her, not helping her. Malachi straightened, wiping a non-existent smear of blood from his perfect jacket. His eyes burned with fury. I protect the lineage, which is more than she is doing, dallying with mortal toys. She is distracted by this farce when the blood moon demands her focus. Your survival is a threat to the ascension itself. The ascension, Kalen repeated, his voice low and pointed. He pulled the gray chronicle from behind his back, holding up the inverted crest for Malachi to see. The Crimson Vow. The sacrifice of the queen's remaining humanity. Vasilisa Volkov wrote about it. She feared it. She tried to find a way out. Malachi's composure shattered. His eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock crossing his features. The mention of the chronicle and the private details of the Crimson Vow, a secret known only to the most ancient court members, was a profound blow. Where did you get that? Malachi roared, lunging forward, his movements no longer controlled, but desperate. Kalen knew he couldn't survive another close-quarters fight. He didn't run, he threw the book. Not at Malachi, but into the breach in the ceiling, directly into the view of the two Strigoi guards who were hovering above. You should read it, Malachi, Kalen shouted, baiting the vampire's obsession with power and legacy. It's about how to avoid turning your queen into a bloodthirsty puppet for your court. The distraction was minimal but effective. Malachi hesitated, his attention split between Kalen and the location of the sacred, dangerous journal. A sharp, dominating voice cut through the violence from the doorway, cold and instantly silencing. Enough. Serafina stood in the doorway, her massive wings fully unfurled, filling the entire frame. The sight of her, terrifying, incandescent, and absolutely enraged, stopped both Malachi and Kalen mid-motion. Her ruby eyes were blazing with a power Kalen had not yet witnessed. The air vibrated with her fury. Malachi, Serafina commanded, her voice a whip of pure ice. You broke my explicit command. You attacked him in a way designed to destroy my rules. You dared to bring down my own castle on a challenge I issued. Malachi immediately dropped to one knee, but the defiance still simmered in his eyes. My queen, I was ensuring the integrity of the line. This human is an unacceptable variable before the blood moon. His presence risks everything. My control is not negotiable, Lord, Seraphina hissed, taking a slow step forward. And you questioned it. You questioned my authority in my home. You will stand down. Or face the eternal consequence of treason. The air crackled. Malachi knew he was beaten. He bowed his head deeply. As you command, my queen. Seraphina did not look at Kaelin, but she spoke the final instruction clearly. Return to your duties, Malachi. He survives this night. You will not approach him again without my direct, verbal order. You have 28 nights left to wait, or suffer my wrath. Malachi gathered his loyalists and vanished into the ceiling breach, leaving Kaelin alone with Seraphina. She waited until the sounds of their exit had completely faded before she turned to face Kaelin. Her anger was gone, replaced by a devastating weariness. She looked at the hole in the ceiling, the damaged room, and the ceramic blade near the fireplace. You draw out the worst in them, Kaelin Stone, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. And now, you have given them ammunition. The Chronicle. They will be searching for that journal, not just for you. Kaelin reached up and, pulling his hand from his pocket, revealed the journal. He hadn't thrown the real one. It had been a decoy, a tattered, unrelated volume. He had hidden the real Chronicle, Vassalises, in a small, damp crevice he had discovered earlier. They'll search the ceiling, Kaelin said simply. I have the real one safe. It tells me about the blood moon. And the cost of your ascension. Seraphina stared at the gray-bound book in his hand, then at Kaelin's face. The weary expression deepened, morphing into a raw vulnerability he hadn't seen before. He had just offered her a key to her own prison, proving that his survival was now tied not just to his wish, but to her own precarious position on the throne. You are not a hunter, Kaelin Stone, Seraphina whispered, her eyes dark with realization. You are a fool or a savior. I haven't decided which yet. But I warn you, if you use that knowledge against me, I will ensure that the fate of your niece is the least of your eternal worries. The daylight hours of the third day were different. Kaelin had spent the early morning securing the hole in the ceiling with scavenged pieces of wood and masonry, a task done in quiet, watchful solitude. He knew he was under intense observation, not just from the remaining loyalists of Malachi, but from Seraphina herself. When the lock turned that afternoon, it wasn't a silent, stealthy entry, but a commanding one. Seraphina swept into the room, this time alone, without the stifling presence of Malachi. She looked tired, the unnatural paleness of her skin seeming more pronounced in the weak light. The hunter has become a handyman, Seraphina observed, gesturing to the patched ceiling. Pragmatic. I appreciate that. It saves my servants the trouble, and they are currently occupied dealing with the political fallout of last night's unprofessional attempt on your life. Malachi is being punished? Kaelin asked, leaning against the cold stone, the stolen journal tucked securely beneath the cot. Malachi is being managed, Seraphina corrected, the word sharp. He is too powerful, too embedded in the court to simply destroy, especially with the blood moon approaching. I need his loyalty, or at least his compliance. And that is where you come in, Kaelin Stone. Seraphina moved to the single, high-barred window, looking out at the distant, desolate forest. She didn't look at Kaelin as she spoke, allowing her words to drift into the quiet air. The Crimson Vow, as you now know, demands a transition. The court desires that I shed my remaining moral restraint to become a creature of absolute, unchallenged darkness. This is necessary, they believe, for the survival of the Volkov line. But I refuse to be a mere puppet of prophecy. My ancestors, like Vassalisa, fought this descent, and I will too. Kaelin understood the gambit instantly. You want me to be a distraction, a provocation. You want to use my survival as proof that your current path, the path of amusement and games, is superior to Malachi's immediate, brutal efficiency. If I live, it suggests you are in control. Seraphina finally turned, her ruby eyes glittering with a dangerous intelligence. More than a distraction. You are a catalyst. The court respects strength and ingenuity. Your continued defiance in the face of their attempts makes me look powerful. It makes them look weak. If you, a fragile mortal, can continuously outwit their best hunters, their faith in Malachi's leadership will crumble. It buys me time to find a solution to the vow. And what do I get in return, princess, besides 27 more nights of target practice? Kaelin challenged. Information, she replied, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You need to know how to perform the ritual to bring your niece back. I cannot perform it, not yet, and certainly not if I become the Dark Queen Malachi desires. I will give you access to the forbidden wing of the library, the one that contains the true texts on ancient life magic. But you must use the daylight hours wisely. You must leave no trace. She presented him with a small, intricately carved silver key, not to a door, but to a locking clasp hidden within the spine of a shelf in the main library. You are now operating under my protection, Kaelin, Seraphina said, dropping the key into his open palm. It felt unnaturally cold. If any member of the court, or any Strigoi, touches you during the day, they will answer directly to me. If they succeed in killing you at night, they will be lauded. That is the game. Do not mistake my alliance for kindness. I am using you to buy my freedom. You are using me to buy your niece's life. Kaelin looked at the key, then back at her. The line between predator and partner had become perilously thin. Understood, Seraphina. But a key isn't enough. If I'm to be your catalyst, I need to know what I'm fighting. What is the solution to the vow that you are seeking? Seraphina hesitated, a shadow of pain passing across her face. It is a legend. A myth whispered among the ancient houses. A counter-ritual that requires a binding, non-blood sacrifice. A complete transference of eternal life force. A willing gift. It is an impossible solution, Kaelin. But it is the only one that saves my soul from the darkness. The meaning was clear. Seraphina needed an immortal willing to trade their eternity for her redemption. An impossible wish, perhaps even more impossible than Kaelin's. I'll stick to finding the resurrection ritual first, Kaelin decided. I have 27 nights. And I need more than the key. I need to know the castle's true weak spots. The hidden tunnels. The escape routes. Just in case your management of Malachi fails. Seraphina gave a slow, dry smile that reached her eyes for the first time. Practicality. Excellent. The oldest tunnel entrance is in the west wing, beneath the gargoyle's pedestal in the ruined chapel. It leads to the catacombs, which Malachi is using as his private base of operations. But that is your final escape route, Kaelin. Use it only when the game is truly lost. She turned to leave, but paused at the doorway, her wings momentarily catching the weak sunlight. One more thing, Hunter, she said, her voice turning sharp again. I know you have Vasilice's chronicle. Guard it well. It contains more than just the vow. It contains the key to the resurrection magic you seek. But it also contains the names of the court members who tried to kill her. If Malachi gets his hands on it, both our games are over. She was gone, leaving Kaelin with the silver key, a mission, and a deeper understanding of the deadly dance he was now performing. A fragile alliance against a castle full of sleeping enemies, all leading up to the inevitable climax of the Blood Moon. Kaelin clutched the silver key. His survival was no longer just his own, it was tied to the fate of the Blood Moon Princess. The fifth day arrived, and Kaelin immediately put Seraphina's concession to use. The main library, which had seemed immense and overwhelming before, now felt like a target. He needed the forbidden texts and he needed to understand the mechanics of the Blood Moon Ascension before Malachi made his next move. He walked swiftly through the deserted castle corridors. The midday sun was high, filtering weak, colored light through stained glass windows depicting the gruesome history of the Volkov line. The silence of the castle felt less like peace and more like a held breath. Kaelin reached the library. The sheer volume of books was intimidating, but he ignored the endless shelves of documented cruelty and ancient history. He went straight to the section Seraphina had indicated, a wall of shelves dedicated to the Volkov ruling family's personal archives. He scanned the spines until he found the designated location, a row of books on genealogy and minor administrative texts. He ran his hand along the shelf, feeling for the subtle seam in the wood. His fingers found a small, almost invisible depression. He inserted the silver key Seraphina had given him. There was a soft, well-oiled click, and an entire section of the bookshelf, perhaps 10 feet wide, silently swung inward, revealing a dark, claustrophobic inner chamber. The air in the hidden room was cold and dry, smelling of parchment and ozone, the distinctive scent of powerful, contained magic. The shelves here were made of iron, holding fewer books, but each one looked terrifyingly potent. These were not chronicles, they were grimoires. Kalen wasted no time. He pulled out Vasilice's chronicle from beneath his jacket and compared its cryptic notes to the titles of the grimoires. Vasilice's ancestor had mentioned the ritual of the undone knot, the ancient spell of reverse mortality, as something that could potentially bind and restore life force. Kalen quickly located a thick, black-bound volume titled Mortis et Vita, the only book dedicated entirely to the boundaries between life and death. He opened it, his heart pounding a steady rhythm against his ribs. The text was intricate, written in a swirling, archaic script, but Kalen was a quick study in the language of the arcane, a necessity in his profession. The ritual was brutally complex, requiring not only Seraphina's power but also a focused life essence, a complete, willing surrender of one living being's soul to guide the dead soul back. He realized the awful symmetry of his initial bargain. Seraphina had agreed to attempt the impossible, knowing the ritual likely demanded the sacrifice of his life force to bring his niece back. His death was the intended cost, regardless of whether he survived the 30 nights. Kalen was so absorbed in tracing the diagrams of soul transference that he failed to notice the subtle disturbance outside the hidden chamber. He only realized his danger when the light in the outer library suddenly vanished. Not faded, vanished. The heavy velvet drapes across the library's massive windows had been pulled shut, plunging the entire room into an impenetrable, artificial night. Kalen cursed under his breath, jamming the large grimoire and the chronicle back into his jacket. He quickly pressed the silver key back into the lock, and the hidden bookshelf sealed with a soft, final thunk. He was now trapped in the library, in the dark, with a predator. The silence was heavier, charged with anticipation. Kalen drew a ceramic blade and flattened himself against the cold stone of the wall. This was not Malachi's strategic assault. This was personal, stealthy, and intimate. A low, feminine voice purred from the darkness, close enough to send shivers down his spine. The hunter is foolish to hunt in the dark. Don't you know, Kalen Stone, that the dark is our kingdom, and we know every corner, every breath? A figure materialized slowly from the blackness, tall, elegant, and strikingly beautiful, dressed in flowing silks. Her hair was the color of liquid mercury, and her eyes held a soft, dangerous violet glow. This was Lady Viridian, a key member of Seraphina's inner circle, known for her speed and hypnotic influence. She was part of the court that Malachi was trying to rally. Viridian, Kalen acknowledged, his voice strained but steady. I thought you preferred the company of poetry and wine, not the grim business of assassination. The princess's strange little game has become tiresome, Viridian whispered, circling him slowly, like a viper studying its prey. Her voice was pure temptation. You are a disruption, a dangerous variable in the Volkov equation. Malachi is too crude. I, however, appreciate an elegant solution. The easiest way to break Seraphina's spirit is to eliminate her pet. She lunged, not with claws, but with a seductive, lightning-fast embrace. Her hands were aimed at his temples. Viridian's power lay in her ability to induce deep, euphoric hypnosis, making the victim completely compliant before she fed. She wanted his soul, not his broken body. Kalen reacted on instinct, dropping backward onto the stone floor. He knew he couldn't fight her physically without risking the loss of the vital books he carried. He needed to break the hypnotic field she generated. As she bent over him, her violet eyes shining like deadly gems, Kalen struck, not at her, but at the light source he knew must be nearby. He kicked hard, connecting with the floor lamp that illuminated the reading table, shattering the thick glass and oil. Simultaneously, he ripped a silver pendant from his jacket's zipper, a piece he had kept as a ward, and flung it directly at her face. The silver didn't wound her, but the sudden, painful flash of light combined with the metallic scent of the mundane metal was enough to break her focus. Viridian cried out, a sound of exquisite pain and fury, staggering back into the deeper shadows. Kalen scrambled to his feet, disoriented but free from her immediate hypnotic grasp. He knew the lamp oil was highly flammable, But he also knew his limited supply of daylight was slipping away. He needed light, and he needed a weapon. He found both. He snatched a wickedly sharp, silver letter opener from the grand mahogany desk, a trivial item, now a lifesaver. He ignited the oil on the shattered lamp using a small, specialized flint he carried. The small, frantic flame did little to light the massive room, but it was enough. Viridian was still reeling, her eyes shielded. "This is not the end, Hunter," Viridian hissed, her voice laced with venomous promise. "You are deep in the spider's web, and the spider is hungry. The night is long." She dissolved into the darkness, a flowing black shadow merging with the walls. She hadn't won, but Kalen hadn't escaped. He had the information, but he was trapped in a castle where the day was now as dangerous as the night, and where Seraphina's own court was actively plotting against her game. He had 27 nights left, and the complexity of his mission was accelerating toward a terrifying climax. Kalen knew he couldn't wait until the next day to report the attack. Viridian's ambition, combined with Malachi's strategic moves, meant Seraphina's control was slipping faster than she realized. More critically, Kalen now understood the true cost of the ritual of the undone knot, his own life essence. He needed to gauge Seraphina's reaction to that knowledge, to see if her promise was a calculated deception or a desperate bargain. He had one way to signal her, a risky one based on the subtle clues he had gathered during his brief daytime reconnaissance. He returned to the South Tower just as the sunset's violet light faded completely, securing his jammed door and retrieving Vasilice's chronicle. He tore a small, insignificant piece of paper from the blank back page of the book and wrote 3 words on it with a charcoal shard: Viridian. Chapel. He then used the air vent in his washroom, a narrow but active duct, to send the message. He knew the air vent opened near a communal, unused bathing chamber far down the hall, a section Seraphina occasionally used for solitary contemplation, if the court rumors he overheard were true. It was a shot in the dark, a desperate gamble that relied on her being either close enough or observant enough to notice the unnatural draft caused by the paper. He waited, the silence of the night pressing in. Hours crawled by. The Strigoi had resumed their slow, lumbering patrol outside his door. Kalen feigned sleep, listening to the heavy footsteps come and go, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm. Then, around the deepest hour of midnight, the lock of his door, the one he had wedged, was picked with a startling, surgical precision. The door opened just wide enough for a figure to slip in, a figure cloaked in the shadows, moving with a silent, absolute grace. It was Seraphina. She was wearing her ceremonial riding gear, tight, dark leather, a hooded cloak, and no visible wings, though Kalen knew they were there, contained by a focused exertion of power. Her eyes were sharp and furious. "You have 5 minutes, Kalen Stone," she hissed, her voice barely a breath. "The risk you have taken by signaling me is monumental. If Malachi or any of his followers discovered this, it would be treated as a conspiracy and your game would end in mutual execution. Viridian tried to kill me in the library today." Kalen cut straight to the point, ignoring her warning. "She sealed the room, plunged it into darkness, and tried to hypnotize me. She failed, but she mentioned the Ascension and that my presence is jeopardizing your control." Seraphina's eyes flashed with anger, but not at Kalen, at the treachery of her own court. "Viridian," she spat, the name tasting like ash. "She is ambitious, but she is weak. She craves the power Malachi promises. She will be dealt with. I gave you my protection during the day. They are testing the boundary of my command." "They're testing you, Seraphina," Kalen corrected, stepping closer. "They see you hesitate. They see you dallying with a moral contract. My wish. Malachi wants the vow, he wants the Dark Queen, and Viridian wants your place." Kalen paused, taking a deep breath. Now came the true risk. He pulled the Mortis et Vita grimoire from its hiding spot. "I accessed the forbidden texts," he said, laying the massive black book on the small cot. "I read the ritual of the undone knot." He looked directly into her luminous eyes. "The ritual requires a living soul to willingly give itself to the void to guide the dead soul back. It requires my life essence to bring my niece back. You knew the cost." Seraphina did not flinch. She did not attempt to lie. She met his gaze with a cold, desperate honesty. "Yes, Kalen. I knew the requirement. It is the only way the ritual works. A complete transference. I offered you an impossible wish, and I offered my power to facilitate it. Your survival in my castle until the 30th night is the only way to earn my commitment to attempt the ritual. I never promised you survival after the ritual was complete. So the whole game was a long execution, Kalen concluded, a faint, bitter smile playing on his lips. I had a feeling. The whole game was a long bargain, Serafina corrected, her voice taking on a fierce intensity. You want your niece's life. I want to avoid eternal, mindless servitude to a dark legacy. Your sacrifice provides a means for your niece's life, and my commitment to the ritual prevents me from becoming the monster that would kill you simply for sport. This bargain is the only tether I have to my remaining humanity, Kalen. Your life, freely given, is a beautiful and terrible thing. It is the perfect, noble-hearted sacrifice to deny the vow. Her vulnerability, though wrapped in monstrous logic, was profoundly affecting. She wasn't just using him. She was relying on him to maintain her own moral edge against the darkness consuming her. All right, Kalen conceded. Then the meeting is still necessary. You and I need to solidify our alliance against your court. I have found an entry to the catacombs beneath the ruined chapel. Malachi is using it as his base of operations. If he is consolidating power, he is preparing for a coup before the blood moon. I need to get inside, and you need to know what he is planning. Serafina stared at him for a long, silent moment, assessing the raw, suicidal courage of the man standing before her. Go to the chapel when the moon is at its zenith, she commanded, her voice regaining its iron strength. I will be waiting. You will show me the entrance. If you betray me, if you try to escape or contact your outside world, I will know. And I will ensure your niece's soul is lost to me forever. She didn't wait for a reply. She turned, melting back into the shadows she had arrived in, and the heavy door was silently secured. Kalen was left alone in the dark room, with the cold print of the Mortis et Vita grimoire burning on the cot. He had 25 nights left. He was now an unwilling double agent, walking into a midnight meeting with the vampire queen to plot against her own council in the heart of her fortress. The game of survival had turned into a full-scale, life-or-death political war, and Kalen Stone was Serafina Volkov's only mortal ally. The moon reached its zenith, a silver disk hanging low and cold over the ruined spire of Castle Volkov. Kalen moved silently through the deserted corridors. He had left the south tower not by the door, but through the small, unused fireplace chimney, having tested the integrity of the smoke-caked stone earlier. He was now relying entirely on his stealth and Serafina's promise of nocturnal protection. Any Strigoi or court member he encountered would be free to kill him, unless Serafina was physically present to command otherwise. The ruined chapel was in the desolate west wing, a structure mostly open to the elements, scarred by some ancient, violent confrontation. Stone pillars were shattered, and the grand altar lay toppled, choked by moss and thorny weeds. The air here was fresher, carrying the scent of damp earth and the wild, untamed forest outside. Kalen reached the center of the chapel. Serafina was waiting, standing beside a collapsed marble statue, her cloak blending perfectly with the deep shadows. She looked less like a queen and more like an ancient sentinel. You are late, Hunter, she murmured, her voice a low hum. Punctuality is a virtue in a time of treason. I was checking the watch rota of the Western Sentinels, Kalen replied, emerging from the darkness. They are tighter than usual. Malachi is deploying his forces. Serafina gave a curt nod, accepting the information as payment for his tardiness. Show me the entrance. If Malachi is consolidating his loyalists, he is preparing to strike soon. The blood moon is too close for this infighting. Kalen moved to the broken pedestal of a massive, wingless gargoyle statue, half buried in the rubble. He knelt down, running his hands over the base. The carvings here aren't decoration, they're markers, Kalen explained, pushing aside a clump of thick ivy. This pedestal is hollow. The original builders often used the lowest part of the spire as an access point to the foundation tunnels before sealing the structure. This one was sealed haphazardly. He located a small, almost invisible fissure in the stone and pressed a specific sequence of points he had observed in Vasilis's chronicle drawings, a series of runic pressure marks. There was a low, scraping sound of stone grinding on stone. The pedestal base shifted a few inches, revealing a dark, square opening into the earth, leading to a steep, uneven set of stairs. The cold, fetid air that rushed out smelled strongly of mildew, old earth, and a faint, metallic tang Kalen recognized as ancient vampire residue. The catacombs, Serafina breathed, stepping forward, her eyes narrowed. This has been lost for centuries. A perfect, dark sanctuary for a conspirator. He's using it to gather forces outside of your visual reach, Kalen confirmed. We need to know the extent of his forces and if they're just court members or imported mercenaries. Serafina looked at the dark opening, then back at Kalen. The risk of sending him down there was enormous. The risk of going herself was catastrophic. A queen caught infiltrating her own catacombs could be politically devastating if caught. I cannot descend, Serafina stated, her voice tight with frustration. The tunnel is too narrow for my wings, and if Malachi's men are down there, I cannot afford to be trapped in close quarters without the ability to fight at full capacity. She looked Kalen in the eyes, her gaze demanding trust he hadn't yet earned. Go, Kalen Stone. Go down and assess his forces. Find his communications, his plans, and any evidence of his collusion with the outside world. This is no longer about your survival. It is about the balance of power in my domain. If you do this, I will owe you more than just a ritual. I will owe you my throne. And if I don't come back? Kalen asked, testing her resolve. Then your sacrifice will have bought me nothing, Serafina replied, with brutal honesty. And I will take back the throne by force, and your niece's soul will remain lost because the counter-ritual requires the utmost focus, not blood-soaked revenge. Return to me alive, Kalen. That is my command. Kalen didn't argue. He knew this was the moment of complete commitment. He drew his last ceramic blade, checked the hidden filament in his glove, and lowered himself into the dark hole. The descent was difficult, the steps slick with centuries of moisture. The tunnel opened into a long, damp crypt. The air was heavy, the sounds of the castle above entirely muffled. Kalen could hear the distant, low murmur of voices echoing through the stone network, Malachi's council. He moved through the catacombs, a maze of tombs and broken statuary. He found small, temporary encampments, cots, rations, and maps, all confirming Malachi's conspiracy. The maps were the most damning. They outlined strategic points of the castle, not for defense, but for assault, focusing specifically on Serafina's private chambers and the throne room. Then, Kalen found the communications hub, a small, makeshift office set up in a large, empty sarcophagus. On a stone table was a sheet of parchment, still drying from a fresh ink inscription. It was a formal decree, bearing the Volkov sigil, but Malachi's personal seal was affixed below it. The decree was titled, Edict of Provisional Authority. It proclaimed Serafina Volkov mentally unstable and unfit to rule due to her unnatural obsession with mortal affairs and her failure to adhere to the Crimson Vow. It named Malachi as the regent, to assume all powers until the blood moon, at which point Serafina would be relieved of her duties permanently. The timing was the crucial detail. The edict was set to be delivered and enacted 3 nights from now, 4 days before the blood moon. Malachi was not waiting for the blood moon to strike, he was preempting it, forcing Serafina to abdicate before the ritual could even begin. Kalen tucked the decree into his belt, knowing it was the undeniable evidence Serafina needed. But as he turned to retreat, he heard heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching his location. He didn't have time to hide. He squeezed behind a moss-covered column just as Lord Malachi himself walked into the crypt, accompanied by Lady Viridian and 2 massive Strigoi guards. Malachi was holding a small, silver filigreed box. He opened it, revealing a shimmering, pale blue liquid. The Queen suspects something, Malachi murmured to Viridian, his voice filled with cold calculation. She must not be lucid for the edict. This vial is a powerful paralyzing agent. It will render her conscious but unable to move or speak for a full 24 hours. Enough time to secure the throne room and announce the regency. Viridian smiled, a cruel, satisfied expression. A silent queen. Perfect. She will watch her mortal toy fail and watch us take the castle. But I still believe we should dispose of the hunter tonight, Malachi. He is a distraction. No, Malachi stated, sealing the box. Let her keep her toy. I want the mortal to witness the failure of her game. It will ensure her despair is complete. 3 nights, Viridian. 3 nights, and the Volkov line will be cleansed of this weakness. Kalen listened, heart pounding, the paralysis plot chilling him to the core. 3 nights. He had to escape, not just for his life, but for Serafina's rule. He had the evidence, and now he had the plot to neutralize her. He waited, rigid behind the column, until the 4 figures moved past him and deeper into the catacombs. He then scrambled back, desperate to bring the terrible news to the waiting queen. Kalen emerged from the darkness of the catacombs, scraping the last bit of wet earth from his shoulders. Serafina was instantly at his side, her pale face taut with anticipation. Her ruby eyes scanned his frame, searching for wounds, before settling on his tense expression. "What did you find, Kalen?" she demanded, her voice low and edged with dread. Kalen pulled the wrinkled sheet of parchment from his belt and handed it to her. Malachi's plan is not to wait for the blood moon. He is preparing a preemptive coup. The Edict of Provisional Authority, 3 nights from now. He plans to declare you unfit to rule. Serafina's fingers gripped the parchment so tightly the fragile paper threatened to tear. She read the decree swiftly, her features hardening into granite. The betrayal was absolute, but she betrayed no shock, only a cold, ancient fury. "Treason," she hissed, the word a deadly venom. "He misjudged my patience, but he hasn't misjudged the timing. 3 nights is too fast to rally my loyalists outside the castle. He will try to neutralize me first. He has a plan for that too," Kalen reported, his voice low. "A paralyzing agent, a pale blue liquid. Strong enough to render you conscious but completely immobile for 24 hours. He intends to use it to secure the throne room and announce the regency before you can fight back." Serafina closed her eyes briefly, her head tilting back as if absorbing the weight of centuries of betrayal. When she opened them, the weariness was gone, replaced by a ruthless, tactical focus. "The paralyzing agent is likely synthesized from the nightshade orchid, a rare plant found only in the deepest part of the Black Forest," Serafina explained, pacing rapidly across the ruined stone floor. "It is untraceable by mundane means. I cannot be poisoned by food or drink, and I am too powerful to be subdued by force without a pitched battle. Malachi knows this. He will use a different vector." "A ceremonial ritual?" Kalen guessed. "Something that requires skin-to-skin contact, or a shared, ancient rite?" Serafina stopped, turning slowly to face him. Her eyes were piercing, evaluating Kalen not as an ally, but as a critical piece of a complex defense mechanism. "The greatest vulnerability of a high vampire is during the transfer of blood," she murmured, her voice dangerously seductive. "It is the most intimate, sacred, and powerful connection we have. A vampire receiving blood must lower their defenses completely to absorb the life essence. If he can force a small, ceremonial taste on me, the paralyzing agent will be instantly effective." Kalen understood the terror of the situation. Malachi would try to turn Serafina's sacred ritual into her downfall. "Then we stop him from forcing the contact," Kalen concluded. "That is reactive," Serafina dismissed him with a sharp wave of her hand. "We need a preemptive strike. I need to make myself immune to the paralysis, or, failing that, I need to make the transfer useless to him. There is only one way to counter the nightshade orchid, with a direct, focused transference of a pure, foreign essence." She advanced towards Kalen, the air thickening with a sudden, overwhelming heat, contrasting with the cold stone. She stood inches from him, the sheer force of her supernatural will pressing against his mortal frame. "Kalen's stone," Serafina whispered, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "You have proven you are not loyal to Malachi. You are pure, untainted by the sickness of this castle. Your mortal blood, so full of defiance and life, is the only antidote I can trust. If I consume a focused measure of your blood, not a lethal amount, but a binding one, my system will be charged with a foreign essence that will recognize and reject the nightshade toxin." Kalen felt a cold dread mix with a strange, intoxicating fascination. She wasn't asking for a romantic embrace, she was asking for a calculated, clinical transfusion, yet the act itself was fraught with monumental, intimate risk. "You want me to risk lethal exposure to a creature of the night, so you can neutralize the poison?" Kalen asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "If you take too much, or if your instincts fail, the game ends tonight." "I will not fail," Serafina swore, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. "But the transference must be complete. It cannot be a superficial wound. It must be a deep connection, Enough for the essence to bind. She reached up, her long, sharp fingers gently tracing the pulse point in his neck, the spot where he was most vulnerable. Kalen could feel the cold, demanding pressure of her nails just barely breaking the surface of his skin. You have 3 nights left to survive, Hunter, Serafina continued, her eyes fixed on his. This act, this transference, will be the greatest risk of your challenge. But if we succeed, you buy yourself 27 more nights. And you gain a bond with me, an intimate knowledge of my nature that will make you invisible to my enemies. They will assume I have simply fed, and the threat of the human will be dismissed. Your survival becomes my weapon. Kalen closed his eyes for a moment, weighing the terror against the necessity. He needed her alive to resurrect his niece. He needed her power focused and untainted. He opened his eyes and met her gaze, his own gray eyes shining with a desperate, self-sacrificing resolve. Do it, Serafina, he commanded, his voice tight. But you take only what is necessary to reject the poison. Not a drop more. And after this, there are no more secrets between us. We are truly allies against your court. Serafina smiled, a fleeting, triumphant expression that did not reach her predatory eyes. Agreed, Kalen Stone. You continue to surprise me. Close your eyes, Hunter. And do not move. Her lips parted, the sharp tips of her fangs descending. The contact was not violent, but fiercely controlled. Kalen felt a brief, burning pinch, followed by a sudden, dizzying sense of warmth being drawn out of his body. The sensation was intense, terrifying, yet strangely profound. He held absolutely still, trusting her promise, trusting her control, trusting the monster with his life. The moment lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then the contact broke. Serafina pulled back, her eyes briefly closed, a visible tremor of power running through her frame as she absorbed the essence. She licked her lips, her expression now one of absolute control, the faint, ruby glow of her eyes intensified. It is done, she murmured, her voice deeper, stronger. The poison will not work. You have bought me time, Kalen, and you have made yourself a part of me, in the most primal way. Your scent, your essence, it is now mine. They will not look for you as an enemy anymore. They will assume you are my property. She reached out and roughly pulled Kalen's head to her shoulder, pressing him into the cold leather. Now listen. Malachi expects me to retaliate. I won't. I will feign ignorance. For the next 3 days, you will not leave your tower, not even during the day. I will come to you nightly with plans. You are now the ghost in the machine. And you are safe, Hunter. Until the 27th night, when our original bargain is due. The confines of the South Tower quarters became the unlikely war room of Castle Volkov. For the next 3 days, Kalen Stone did not venture out, not even into the relative safety of the daylight. The risk was too high. Malachi's faction would be looking for any sign of Serafina's countermovement. Kalen was the perfect hiding place, the perceived amusement that everyone had already written off. Serafina visited him just after midnight on each of the remaining 3 nights, always moving like a shadow, shedding her royal demeanor for the intensity of a desperate tactician. The blood transference had subtly altered their dynamic. There was a raw, primal awareness between them now. Kalen could sense the slightest shift in her mood, her focused rage, the thread of ancient fear that ran beneath her icy control. Serafina, in turn, seemed unnerved by her own vulnerability, relying on a mere mortal for her political survival. On the night before Malachi's planned coup, Serafina arrived with a map of the castle, drawn on fine, brittle parchment. She spread it out on the stone floor, using a torch brought specifically to light the details, casting dancing shadows on Kalen's face. Malachi's plan relies on 3 things, Serafina explained, tracing lines on the map with a sharp fingernail. First, the paralysis of the queen. Second, control of the 2 main gates to secure the castle from any external loyalist force. Third, the public announcement of the edict in the throne room at the height of the coup. The paralysis is neutralized, Kalen confirmed, touching the faint bite marks on his neck, scars of their bond. He won't know until he tries the transfer. That means he still plans to move his forces into position tonight. Exactly, Serafina agreed. His mistake is underestimating my reach and overestimating his own loyalty base. While his Strigoi and Viridian's faction will be positioned to storm my private quarters, His most potent force is currently positioned where you found them, the catacombs beneath the chapel. Kalen pointed to a small, isolated area on the map far from the main throne room. The only way to hit them is to collapse their base. If his troops are trapped in the tunnels, he loses his primary strike force. Serafina nodded slowly. The foundation of the West Wing is precarious, Kalen. Vasilisa's chronicle mentioned an ancient structural flaw near the main cisterns that run directly beneath the chapel. With a precise, heavy charge placed at that juncture, the catacomb entrance would collapse, sealing his forces inside. A heavy charge is out of the question, Kalen countered. Too loud, too noticeable, and I don't have explosives. I'd have to use a kinetic lever, something that exploits the structural flaw. I need access to the cisterns. Serafina studied his face, a mixture of cold admiration and disbelief in her eyes. The main cisterns are sealed and require the master engineer's key, a tool kept hidden in the East Wing vault, guarded by a very old, very irritable Nosferatu guard named Relatos. Then my plan for the coup is clear, Kalen stated, his gray eyes shining with ruthless focus. I retrieve the key, I access the cisterns, and I set the kinetic trap. You, Princess, must play the victim. You must let Malachi believe the paralysis is still possible. Serafina's expression darkened. That means I must receive him and his coterie. I must allow him close enough to attempt the transfer of the poisoned essence. If my loyalists see me resisting, they will not follow the decree. It's the only way to draw out the leader, Kalen insisted. You receive Malachi and Viridian in your chambers at the hour of the coup, an hour before sunrise. You act weak, distracted. When he attempts the ritual, you let him believe the poison is working, and you give the signal. And what is the signal, Hunter? Serafina asked, her voice barely a breath. Kalen looked at the delicate map and then back at the powerful vampire queen. He knew exactly what he needed to do to maintain the illusion of her vulnerability and simultaneously ensure his own escape to the West Wing. When he leans in to perform the poison transfer, Kalen explained, his voice low, you will raise your hand, not to fight, but to touch his face. And you will whisper one word, Vasilisa. That word will remind him of the prophecy, of the consequences of treason, and it will be the sound of your defiance. When I hear that word, I will initiate the collapse. Serafina absorbed the plan. The risk was enormous, but the logic was flawless. It leveraged the arrogance of her enemy and exploited the structural secrets of her castle. Go now, Kalen Stone, Serafina commanded, extinguishing the torch and plunging the room back into silent darkness. You have mere hours before the coup. Find the vault, acquire the key, and ensure the catacombs become Malachi's tomb. If you succeed, my throne is yours to command. If you fail, the blood moon will rise on a new, darker Volkov dynasty, and your niece's soul will be lost forever. Kalen slipped out of the tower, moving with a desperate purpose. His mission was no longer about hiding. It was about infiltration, sabotage, and survival. The first objective, the East Wing vault and the Master Engineer's key. He moved low, running along the shadows of the main halls, relying on the cloak of his bond with Serafina. The scent of her power now masked his own vulnerability. The castle was quiet, unnaturally so. Too quiet. Malachi's forces were already moving. Kalen reached the East Wing, the most opulent and heavily guarded part of the castle. The vault door was massive, sealed by runic locks and watched by Relatos, a creature of raw, terrifying age. Relatos was not merely a guard. He was a relic, squat and ancient, his face a horrifying mask of stretched, pale skin and exposed bone. Kalen needed to bypass him silently, a near impossible feat against a Nosferatu whose senses were honed over a millennium. As Kalen flattened himself against a pillar, he realized that a silent approach wouldn't work. He needed a calculated risk. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the single remaining ceramic blade. He threw it hard, not at Relatos, but at the enormous, intricately carved chandelier hanging directly above the Nosferatu. The tiny, silent blade impacted one of the main support chains with a sharp, resonant ping. Relatos, ancient and superstitious, immediately looked up, startled by the unexpected sound and the sudden, slight sway of the chandelier. In that fractional second of distraction, Kalen moved. He covered the ground between them in a blur, drawing the microfilament garrote from his glove. He didn't aim for the neck, He aimed for the arms, tying the filament around Vladis's thick, armored wrists and yanking the ancient creature's arms together with brutal force. The Nosferatu let out a muffled, outraged bellow, but Kalen had already plunged his second, last ceramic blade deep into the creature's thick thigh, a non-lethal, but excruciatingly painful hit designed to slow his ancient metabolism. Vladis roared, stunned by the unexpected pain and the speed of the mortal. Kalen had bought himself less than a minute. He frantically worked the runic locks of the vault door. He remembered the specific counter-sequence from one of Vasilice's earlier notes, a family safeguard. Click. The vault door groaned open. Kalen slipped inside, retrieved the heavy, oddly shaped master engineer's key from its velvet cradle, and was out, sealing the vault door shut just as Vladis was beginning to tear at the filament binding his wrists. Kalen was running now, the key heavy in his hand, his heart threatening to burst from his chest. The entire East Wing was awake. He was halfway across the castle, heading toward the cisterns beneath the chapel. The trap was set. Now he just had to spring it. The castle was now fully awake, though its awakening was silent and insidious. Kalen ran, the heavy, archaic master engineer's key cold and cumbersome in his grip. The alarm hadn't been raised by the guards yet, but the frantic roar of Vladis from the East Wing would soon mobilize Malachi's tactical forces. Kalen was a fleeting shadow, moving against the flow of the coup, trusting the deep, intimate bond of the shared blood to mask his scent from any casual patrols. He reached the West Wing, the air growing colder and damper as he neared the foundation. The cistern access point was not in the chapel itself, but beneath a series of ancient, moss-covered arches leading to the castle's underground reservoir. Kalen found the sealed iron door, a disc of rusted metal secured by a massive, multi-barreled lock. He inserted the engineer's key. It turned with a deafening grind of ancient gears, sounding like the scream of the fortress itself. Kalen slipped inside the cistern chamber. The space was enormous, cold, and echoing, dominated by the massive stone reservoirs of water. He moved along the narrow maintenance ledge, flashlight in hand, searching for the specific structural flaw Vasilisa had noted, the weak point directly beneath the chapel's foundation, where the ancient stone had cracked centuries ago. He found it, a deep, horizontal fissure in the load-bearing wall, patched repeatedly but still visibly compromised. This was the fulcrum. To trigger a kinetic collapse, Kalen didn't need explosives. He needed leverage and weight. He worked frantically, using the sheer size of the engineer's key as a wedge, forcing it into the crack. He then located a massive, discarded stone block, part of the original construction, and using the principles of physics and sheer desperate strength, he leveraged the block against the key, turning it into a makeshift, slow-motion battering ram aimed at the fissure. His muscles burned, his breath ragged in the cold, damp air. He was a fragile, mortal clock counting down to the moment of his queen's betrayal. Simultaneously, in the distant, opulent royal chambers of the East Wing, Serafina Volkov sat alone. She was dressed in a long, simple, crimson night robe, her white hair loose around her shoulders. She looked perfectly composed, yet profoundly weary, exactly the image of a queen mentally defeated by the stresses of her reign, and exactly as Malachi would expect to find her. The doors to her private antechamber burst open. Lord Malachi stood there, flanked by Lady Viridian and 4 silent Strigoi guards. The time was just before dawn, the darkest, quietest hour of the coup. Malachi's expression was one of controlled triumph. "My queen," he said, his voice laced with false concern. "You look unwell. The stresses of governance have clearly become too much. It falls to me, as regent, to assume the burdens you can no longer bear." Serafina raised her hand weakly, her voice a strained whisper, playing her part flawlessly. "Malachi, what is the meaning of this intrusion? You trespass on private ground. Treason must be answered with necessity, my queen," Malachi replied, stepping forward. He held the silver box containing the paralyzing agent, his eyes cold and devoid of affection. "But no force is necessary. Only cleansing. The court requires your lucidity for the ritual transfer of power. It is a necessary, spiritual cleansing, Serafina. You must be prepared to receive the ancient power." Viridian stepped forward, her violet eyes shining with malice. She held a shallow, ornate cup, the recipient of the blood that would be transferred. "Drink," My queen, Malachi commanded, holding the paralyzing vial aloft. For the good of the Volkov line. Serafina knew this was the moment. She allowed her hand to tremble as she reached for the cup. She let her face convey confusion and slow, dawning horror. She had to sell the moment perfectly. She raised the cup, paused, and then deliberately fumbled, allowing a few drops of the unpoisoned liquid to spill onto the marble floor. Malachi's patience snapped. Enough, he roared. He seized her arm, his grip like iron, and thrust the vial of paralyzing agent towards the cup, intending to dose the liquid before forcing her to drink. As he moved in, Serafina acted. She didn't fight his strength, she embraced the intimacy of the moment. She raised her free hand, not to strike, but to lightly touch the cold, sharp plane of Malachi's cheek, mimicking a gesture of weak, dying affection. She looked him directly in the eye, and whispered the single, damning word, Vasilisa. In the depths of the cistern, Kalen heard nothing, but he felt the signal. The whispered word, transmitted through the subtle psychic resonance of their shared bond, hit him like a physical shock. He gave one final, desperate heave on the stone block. The engineer's key, wedged deep in the fissure, acted as the pivot. The immense pressure, focused on the structural flaw, reached the critical point. With a deep, horrifying rumble, the ancient foundation wall gave way. It wasn't an explosion, but a massive, sustained implosion. The entire load-bearing section beneath the chapel collapsed inward. The deafening sound of tons of stone, water, and earth crashing down echoed through the foundation, instantly sealing the entrance to the catacombs and burying Malachi's main forces, including the 2 guards, in a geological coffin. In the Queen's chambers, the noise was a distant, but unmistakable roar. The castle shuddered violently. Malachi's face, which had been contorted with triumph, froze in utter disbelief. He was still holding the paralyzing vial, his hand poised over the cup. He looked from Serafina to the ceiling, the full horror of the situation dawning on him. "What have you done?" Malachi whispered, his voice shaking with betrayed rage. He knew that sound, the collapse of the catacombs. His entire army was gone. Serafina smiled, a slow, terrifying expression of ancient victory. Her eyes were no longer weak, they blazed with the full, unbridled power of the Blood Moon Queen. "I only kept my bargain, Malachi," Serafina stated, her voice now ringing with authority. "I neutralized the poison. And I neutralized the treason. The Blood Moon is mine to rule, not yours to seize." She released the paralyzing vial from his frozen grip. Malachi, realizing the blood bond had been a tactical ruse, screamed in fury and lunged for her throat. But Serafina was ready. She had not waited for Kalen's success to plan her defense. She moved with impossible speed, her hand a blur as it grasped a hidden blade, a long silver stiletto, from a sheath concealed in her robe. She did not aim to kill, but to incapacitate. The blade plunged deep into Malachi's shoulder, severing the major muscle and tendon. Malachi cried out, a sound of profound pain and humiliation, staggering back, his plot shattered, his body damaged, and his forces entombed. Lady Viridian, seeing the immediate and total failure, screamed and tried to flee, but Serafina's loyalists, who had been waiting in a hidden chamber, burst into the room, quickly overwhelming the remaining Strigoi and seizing both Malachi and Viridian. The coup was over. Serafina had won. And Kalen, the mortal who had risked his life to expose the plot, was still alive, deep in the castle's foundation, waiting to emerge into a world where the power balance had shifted irrevocably. Kalen Stone climbed out of the cistern chamber, his body exhausted, his clothes soaked and smelling of wet earth and old stone. He didn't wait to lock the access point. His priority was re-entry and verification. He moved back through the silent, cold corridors of the West Wing, a shadow of chaos walking into the heart of a resolved coup. He finally reached the East Wing, now humming with a quiet, professional energy. Serafina's loyalists, pale, disciplined vampires he hadn't seen before, moved swiftly, securing the area, but their movements were respectful, reflecting a regime restored. As Kalen rounded the corner leading to the Queen's chambers, he was intercepted by one of the guards. "Halt. Identify yourself," the vampire commanded, a long, ornate rapier instantly pointed at Kalen's chest. "I am Kalen Stone," he stated, his voice raspy from exertion. "I am here by the Queen's command." The mission is complete. The guard frowned, confused. He looked Kalen up and down, a dripping, mud-covered mortal carrying the faint, unmistakable metallic scent of his queen's essence. Before the guard could make a decision, a commanding voice cut through the air. "Stand down, Cashin. He is with me." Seraphina stood in the doorway of her chambers. She was still in the crimson robe, but her composure was now absolute. The fear and tension were gone, replaced by the terrifying serenity of a victor. She moved with an easy, chilling grace, a silver cloth in her hand, wiping a smear of blood from the blade of the stiletto. The blood was dark, Malachi's, not Kalen's. The guard immediately stepped aside, though his eyes remained wide with confusion and suspicion. Seraphina motioned Kalen into the antechamber. The room was clean, the only sign of the struggle being the faint scent of ozone and the lingering metallic tang of vampire blood. Malachi and Viridian were gone. "You succeeded, Hunter," Seraphina stated, her voice low with potent satisfaction. "The catacombs are sealed. Malachi's main force is neutralized. He and Viridian have been taken to the deepest dungeons for formal judgment. My rule is secure, and the threat of the edict is nullified." Kalen leaned heavily against a marble column, his energy spent. "And you? Are you harmed?" A scratch on the shoulder, quickly healed, Seraphina replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "And a necessary lesson learned. Never underestimate the ambition of an advisor. You saved my throne, Kalen Stone. You were the perfect weapon, unseen, underestimated, and devastatingly efficient." She walked toward him, the shift in their dynamic palpable. She was no longer speaking to a prisoner, nor even just an ally. She was speaking to a partner in high treason, bound by blood and a massive shared secret. "Your challenge is now officially altered," Seraphina declared, standing before him. "The survival portion of the contract is superseded by your role in saving the Volkov line. You have 24 nights left, and you are no longer confined to the South Tower. You have earned your place in this castle. You are my consultant, a title that grants you complete access to the public areas and protection from all remaining court members. No one, not even the Strigoi, will touch you without my specific decree." Kalen shook his head slightly, trying to clear the lingering exhaustion. "I didn't do this for a title, Seraphina. I did it for the bargain. The ritual of the undone knot and the life of my niece. The political games are over. Now we focus on the true goal." "And we shall," Seraphina agreed, her expression turning serious. "The blood moon is rapidly approaching. My power is now stable, but to achieve the focus required for the ritual, I need to stabilize my rule completely. That means silencing the dissenters and securing the necessary materials. You will assist me." She reached out and lightly touched the bite marks on his neck, now faint, white scars where the mortal skin had knit back together. The gesture was possessive, a silent reminder of their bond. "Your true purpose here begins now, Kalen," she continued. "Malachi was right about one thing. The blood moon requires focus. I will not descend into the darkness of the Crimson Vow. We will work together, day and night, to find the means to resurrect your niece, and in doing so, we will secure my own freedom from the prophecy. For the next 24 nights, you are no longer the prey, Kalen. You are the shadow on my shoulder, the only one I trust within these walls." She instructed the guard, Cashin, to escort Kalen to a new set of chambers near her own, chambers that were spacious, comfortable, and crucially, contained a private, well-stocked library for his continued research on the resurrection ritual. As Kalen was led away, exhausted but fundamentally changed, he looked back at Seraphina. She stood amidst the polished silence of her chambers, every inch the powerful, ruthless queen she was meant to be. The deadly game of survival had ended in an intimate, precarious alliance. Kalen had walked into the lair of the vampire to save a life, and in doing so, he had become the political and emotional anchor of the Blood Moon Princess. The new chambers granted to Kalen were spacious and, for Castle Volkov, almost luxurious. They were far from the South Tower's cold, damp isolation, situated in a quiet wing just 2 floors below Seraphina's own private suite. The shift in his status was profound. He was no longer a captive waiting for his inevitable death, but a crucial component of the Queen's survival. The remaining court, now subdued and fearful following Malachi's swift destruction, treated Kalen with a careful blend of suspicion and respect, recognizing the scent of their queen's power that now clung to him. The true work began immediately. Kaelin and Seraphina spent the next day and several subsequent nights closeted together in his chambers, poring over the forbidden texts Kaelin had retrieved and the private notes from Vasilice's chronicle. The shared focus was intense, creating a different kind of intimacy, one of minds, not just blood. Seraphina was utterly brilliant, her ancient memory and vast knowledge of arcane magic allowing her to translate the dense, cryptic language of the Mortis et Vita grimoire. Kaelin, with his pragmatic, problem-solving approach honed by years of hunting, provided the grounding perspective, focusing on the logistical impossibilities of the ritual. The undone knot is a ritual of balance, Seraphina explained one night, her long, white hair spilling over the ancient parchment as she traced a complex runic diagram. The faint, metallic scent of his blood, which she had consumed, was a constant, subtle presence between them, amplifying their connection. To restore a life, a pure soul must be guided back across the threshold of death. The price, as we know, is the willing surrender of a living soul, your life essence, Kaelin. Kaelin ran a hand over his tired face. The text specifically mentions a willing sacrifice, Seraphina. Does it also specify that the guiding soul must be mortal? Seraphina paused, her ruby eyes tracing a particularly dense section of the text. The primary components are focused life essence and absolute power to conduct the transference. Vasilice notes that a vampire soul is too corrupted by the essence of the night to serve as a pure guide. It risks drawing the dead soul to the same fate. But what if it's a soul that chooses its sacrifice? Kaelin pressed, looking at the entry in Vasilice's chronicle. Vasilice speaks of a way to purify the essence through an act of absolute, selfless devotion. A way to clean the darkness out of the guiding soul. Is that related to the counter-ritual for the Crimson Vow? Seraphina looked up, the intensity in her eyes breathtaking. That is the key, Kaelin. The counter-ritual, the one I am seeking to avoid the vow, requires an absolute sacrifice, the willing surrender of an immortal soul to the light. It is meant to burn away the darkness and free the vampire from its eternal contract. If I could perform that sacrifice, not only would I break the vow, but my essence would become the purified, guiding soul for the resurrection ritual. The realization hit them both with the force of a revelation. The two impossible wishes, Kaelin's and Seraphina's, were intertwined. Kaelin's life wasn't the only option for the sacrifice. Seraphina's entire existence could be the price. You would sacrifice your immortality to bring my niece back, Kaelin whispered, the enormity of the exchange settling over him. Seraphina didn't flinch. I would sacrifice my eternity to avoid becoming the mindless monster Malachi wished for. And if that sacrifice also frees your niece, then my existence gains a meaning beyond endless tyranny. However, the absolute sacrifice is a myth for a reason. It requires an outside catalyst, a tether to the world of the living, to prevent the purified soul from simply dissolving. Kaelin felt a sudden, profound connection to her, born of shared purpose and shared danger. He reached out and lightly covered the hand Seraphina had resting on the parchment. His touch was warm against her perpetual coldness. I am your tether, Kaelin said, his voice steady. You took my blood, Seraphina. We are bound. My mortal life essence, full of fight and will, is what binds you to this world, preventing your complete dissolution. I will be your anchor for the absolute sacrifice, and you will be the purified guide for the undone knot. The moment stretched, silent and electric. It was more than a plan, it was a pact of shared destiny. Seraphina leaned closer, her eyes searching his, seeking any hint of deceit or fear. She found none. She found only a pragmatic acceptance of an impossible mission. Then we have a new purpose, Hunter, Seraphina finally conceded, her voice husky. The materials required for the absolute sacrifice ritual are rare. The tear of the first morning, a crystal found only in the deepest catacombs, and a lock of hair from a pure-blooded Volkov ancestor, to focus the release of the immortal essence. And we have only 22 nights left before the blood moon. She rose suddenly, breaking the intensity of the moment. Get some rest, Kaelin. Tonight, you worked for me. Tomorrow, you work with me. We begin the hunt for the artifacts at dawn. As Seraphina left his chambers, moving with her signature silent grace, Kaelin was left alone with the maps and the grimoires. The predatory game had evolved into a desperate partnership, held together by a single thread of pure, defiant hope against the ancient rules of the night. Kalen knew that to save his niece, he might lose his life, but he also knew that to save Serafina, he had to risk his soul. The 5th day after the failed coup marked Kalen and Serafina's first joint venture into the forgotten parts of Castle Volkov. The atmosphere was charged with a tension that was less about fear and more about the profound strangeness of their alliance. Serafina was navigating the political fallout of Malachi's treason during the day, ensuring the court understood her absolute authority. At night, she and Kalen were equal partners in a hunt for relics, bound by the fragile hope of avoiding prophecy. They started just after midnight, heading deep into the foundation where Kalen had previously done his sabotage, the remnants of the chapel's collapse. Serafina wore a practical, heavy leather ensemble, moving with a silent, feline grace. Kalen was equipped with tools he had been allowed to scavenge: ropes, a specialized flint and steel lamp, and a hunting knife, his ceramic blades now lost in the depths of the cistern. The tear of the first morning is an ancient crystal, Serafina explained as they descended into the cold, jagged opening Kalen had created near the sealed catacombs. It forms only in places untouched by light for millennia, absorbing the concentrated essence of geological time. The deepest caves beneath the castle, the crypts of the first Volkovs, are the only possible source. Kalen secured a rope, his focus entirely pragmatic. The collapse has made the lower tunnels unstable. I lead. If anything shifts, you use your wings to stabilize us. We move as slow as possible. Serafina gave a curt nod. She was accustomed to commanding, not following, but here, in the unstable darkness of the earth, Kalen's mortal expertise in navigation and survival was undeniably superior. They descended into a complex network of unmapped tunnels, far deeper than the catacombs Malachi had used. The air grew thick, carrying the mineral scent of quartz and limestone. The only illumination came from Kalen's lamp, casting dancing, erratic shadows on the rough-hewn walls. As they moved, Kalen felt the subtle, unnerving pull of their shared bond, a quiet, thrumming awareness. He could sense Serafina's impatience, her desperate need to find the crystal, but also a strange, almost childlike curiosity about the tunnels, a part of her own home that even she had never explored. After what felt like hours, the tunnels opened into a vast, natural cavern. The floor was covered in pale, powdery silt, and the ceiling was impossibly high, a black vault disappearing into the darkness. In the center of the cavern, on a raised, flat slab of black basalt, sat a single, shimmering crystal. It was large and teardrop-shaped, emitting a soft, ethereal blue light that pulsed gently, like a slow heartbeat. "The tear of the first morning," Serafina whispered, her voice filled with awe and triumph. "It exists. It is the perfect container for the focused essence of the absolute sacrifice." Kalen moved forward, but Serafina stopped him with a sharp, warning gesture. "The crystal will be guarded. Not by a creature, but by a Volkov ward. A protective spell against those not of the bloodline." Kalen nodded, understanding the inherent danger. As Serafina prepared to approach the crystal, reciting a low, arcane chant to deactivate the ward, Kalen's hunter instincts screamed a silent warning. The threat didn't come from the crystal. It came from above. A figure dropped from the shadows of the high ceiling, moving with a brutal, clumsy speed. It wasn't a vampire, it was a hulking, terrifyingly large gargoyle, a stone automaton animated by deep magic, one of the castle's ancient, hidden sentinels. "Not a ward," Kalen shouted, pushing Serafina hard out of the way, the distraction breaking her chant. "The sentinel. And it's not Malachi's, it's protecting the crystal." The gargoyle landed with a ground-shaking thud, its eyes glowing with dull, malicious fire. It wasn't fast, but its sheer stone strength was devastating. Its first swing, a massive stone fist, shattered the basalt slab where the crystal sat. Serafina scrambled to her feet, her features contorted with rage at the attack and the interruption of her delicate spell work. "It is protecting the crystal with excessive force," she yelled. Kalen didn't hesitate. He knew he couldn't fight stone with steel. He moved under the sentinel's massive bulk, drawing its focus. "It's a construct. Find the core." Serafina, though infuriated, quickly assessed the situation. She drew on her immense strength, striking the gargoyle's leg with a focused, non-lethal blow that sent ripples of power through the stone. It barely staggered the creature. Kalen noticed something crucial. The creature was wearing a small, tarnished silver amulet around its thick neck, the binding agent for the enchantment. As the gargoyle raised its fist for another crushing blow, Kalen leaped onto its back, climbing the rough stone of its shoulder. The sentinel roared, thrashing wildly. Seraphina moved to distract it, her hands glowing with controlled, dark energy. She slammed a wave of power into the sentinel's chest, slowing its movements for a crucial second. Kalen seized the opportunity. He reached for the amulet, his fingers scraping against the stone. He used his hunting knife, not to cut, but to pry the tarnished silver from the construct's throat. The moment the amulet broke free, the sentinel froze. The malevolent glow in its eyes extinguished. The massive construct collapsed with a sound like a landslide, settling onto the cavern floor in a massive heap of inert stone. Kalen scrambled off the rubble, bruised but unharmed. Seraphina rushed to the fractured basalt slab. The tear of the first morning, however, was safe. Though the slab was destroyed, the crystal itself lay on the stone, shimmering with the same gentle blue light. "The crystal is ours," Seraphina breathed, carefully picking up the relic. It was cold to the touch, and its light cast strange, ethereal shadows on her face, making her look both ancient and impossibly fragile. But the sentinel was unexpected. Kalen countered, retrieving his knife. He ran a hand over the gargoyle's broken shell, and his fingers brushed against a piece of fabric trapped beneath the stone. A small, dark scrap of fine, expensive silk. Not the rough leather of a Strigoi, nor the royal velvet of Seraphina. Kalen held the silk up to the lamp. It was a remnant of a cloak, subtly embroidered with the crest of a minor Volkov house, the house of Lord Corvus, a peripheral court member who had seemed entirely subservient to Seraphina. "We're not done with Malachi's loyalists," Kalen stated grimly. "This sentinel wasn't placed here by an ancient ward. It was placed recently, specifically to guard the crystal. Someone was using this construct, and based on this fabric, I think it was Lord Corvus. He must have been waiting for someone to try and retrieve it." Seraphina's expression turned cold. The coup was suppressed, but the poison of treason lingered. Lord Corvus was still active in the castle, hiding his allegiance to Malachi and waiting for an opportunity. "Corvus," Seraphina said, the name a mere exhalation of frost. "His family controls the access to the Volkov crypts. He was guarding the crystal, and he must also be guarding the final relic, the lock of ancestral hair. He knew exactly what we were seeking." The shared victory had immediately morphed into renewed danger. They had the first piece of the ritual, but now they had a clear, active enemy within the castle walls who knew their ultimate goal. Their partnership was confirmed, their target defined, and the 20 remaining knights had just become a desperate hunt against a hidden enemy. The necessity of confronting Lord Corvus outweighed caution. Seraphina could not afford a hidden traitor who knew their plan and guarded their only means of escape and salvation. They left the caverns, the tear of the first morning crystal secured in Seraphina's private chest, and made their way through the castle to the main Volkov crypts. The crypts were located beneath the central church, a place where generations of the Volkov line were laid to rest. This was consecrated ground even by vampire standards, and rarely visited. Seraphina led the way, her face a mask of cold fury. Kalen followed, alert and ready, the scrap of Corvus's silk cloak secured in his pocket. The entrance was a massive, ornate iron gate, usually sealed by complex, centuries-old wards. Seraphina simply touched the iron bars, and the wards flared crimson and then instantly dissolved. "My blood is the key," she stated, sweeping into the dark, echoing chamber. The crypts were vast, a labyrinth of marble sarcophagi and grim statuary. The air was dry and thick with the scent of pulverized bone and stale incense. Seraphina stopped before a cluster of tombs belonging to the founding generation, the oldest and most powerful of the line. "The ancestral lock of hair," Seraphina whispered, pointing to the tomb of Dmitria Volkov, a queen from the Second Age. "It must be retrieved from the tomb of the purest bloodline to harness the focused essence for the absolute sacrifice." As if on cue, a thin, nervous voice echoed from the shadows behind a towering archway. "I was hoping you would come, my queen." Lord Corvus emerged. He was pale and slight, dressed in black silk, his eyes darting nervously between Kaelin and Seraphina. He was alone, relying on the illusion of sanctuary rather than brute force. He was terrified but desperate. "You betrayed your queen, Corvus." Seraphina's voice was lethal ice, echoing off the marble. "You aided Malachi, you tried to guard the crystal, and now you stand between me and my ancestors." "Forgive me, your majesty," Corvus whined, clasping his hands together. "But I saw the danger. You are dallying with a mortal. You jeopardize the vow." Malachi understood duty. This attempt at mortal redemption will destroy the line. Corvus's eyes flickered towards Kaelin, revealing his true fear, the fear of Seraphina's dangerous deviation from tradition. "The mortal, as you call him, saved my throne from your conspiracy," Seraphina said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward Corvus. "And I do not seek redemption. I seek absolute power, free from the constraints of your archaic prophecy. Now, step away from Demetria's tomb." Corvus shook his head, desperation giving him a thin veneer of courage. "I can't. This is my duty. I hid the lock of hair inside the tomb itself. Only I know the counterward. You cannot simply open a founding tomb, Seraphina. You must use the ceremony of request, or risk unleashing 1,000 years of ancestral wrath." Seraphina paused. Corvus was right. The crypts held ancient, unyielding magic. The ceremony of request required hours of ritual devotion, something they didn't have time for. Corvus believed he had stalemated the queen. Kaelin, however, saw the weakness. Corvus was relying on ritual and fear. "He's bluffing about the ceremony," Kaelin murmured to Seraphina, his voice low and firm. "He is buying time to activate a secondary trap. His eyes keep going to that small, empty niche near the archway." Seraphina glanced at Kaelin, acknowledging the mortal's superior understanding of immediate threats. She trusted his instincts implicitly now, thanks to the blood bond. She turned back to Corvus, a terrifying smile spreading across her lips. "You mistake me, Corvus. I am the Blood Moon Queen. I do not request access to my ancestors' tombs. I command it." She raised her hand, not to cast a spell, but to unleash pure, raw power. She slammed a wave of unbridled kinetic force into the area Kaelin had pointed out, the niche near the archway. The niche exploded, revealing a hidden compartment containing an active, glowing ward stone, Corvus's second trap. The stone shattered, the trap neutralized. Corvus gasped, his face ashen. He had been outmaneuvered and exposed. Seraphina then turned her full, terrifying attention back to the founding tomb of Demetria. She did not recite a chant. She did not follow the ritual. She placed both hands flat on the polished marble surface of the sarcophagus and focused the immense, dark power of her uncorrupted, defiant will. The air in the crypts began to vibrate violently. The marble of the tomb began to crack and grind, not from brute force, but from the immense supernatural pressure of Seraphina's lineage demanding entry. The sound was deafening, the pressure suffocating. With a final explosive crack, the massive marble lid of Demetria's tomb slid a few inches open, pushed by sheer dominance. A plume of dust and ancient energy escaped. Seraphina was breathing heavily, the effort visible even on her immortal frame. But the tomb was open. "Go, Kaelin," Seraphina commanded, her voice strained. "He is neutralized by fear. Retrieve the lock of hair before the ancient ward stabilize and seal the tomb again." Kaelin didn't hesitate. He climbed onto the sarcophagus and, using his knife to wedge the lid open further, reached into the dust-filled darkness. He felt around until his fingers grasped a small, bundled object tied with a fraying ribbon, the ancestral lock of hair. He retrieved it and leaped back down. Corvus, having witnessed the terrifying display of power, a queen bypassing sacred ritual with sheer will, knew his cause was lost. He dropped to his knees, utterly defeated, weeping thin, black tears of terror. Seraphina looked down at the trembling traitor, the fury gone, replaced by a cold finality. She hadn't become the Dark Queen, but she had proven to be a ruthless, absolute ruler. "You will be judged with Malachi, Corvus," Seraphina declared. "But your family's line ends here. Treason against the Blood Moon is eternal." As the royal guards arrived to take Corvus away, Kaelin stood beside Seraphina, holding the second fragile relic. They had bypassed ancient ritual and crushed a lingering political threat. They had secured the materials. Now, only 19 knights remained, and they were ready for the final, terrifying step, preparing for Seraphina's absolute sacrifice and Kaelin's impossible wish. The castle settled into a strained, watchful peace. The swift, brutal end of Malachi and Corvus served as a stark lesson to the remaining court. Seraphina was not weak, she was calculating. The queen and the hunter were now an untouchable unit, moving freely and undisturbed towards their shared, impossible goal. The following week was dedicated to the meticulous preparation for the absolute sacrifice. The ritual was complex, requiring not only the physical components, the tear of the first morning crystal and the ancestral lock of hair, but also precise astrological alignment and the focusing of the immortal essence. They chose the grand altar in the throne room as the ritual site, the place where Seraphina's power was naturally strongest. Night after night, Kaelin and Seraphina worked in the quiet seclusion of his chambers. The work was technical, grinding the ancestral hair into a fine powder, etching the purifying runes onto the black basalt slab that would hold the crystal, and translating the final, most dangerous incantations. Yet the atmosphere was thick with an unacknowledged emotional weight. The blood bond between them, once a tactical defense, now felt like a deep, irreversible connection. Kaelin could read the subtle tension in Seraphina's stance, the flicker of profound fear in her eyes when she translated the sections discussing the soul's potential dissolution after the sacrifice. Seraphina, in turn, often found herself distracted by Kaelin's purely mortal existence. His steady, rhythmic breathing, the warmth of his skin when their hands accidentally brushed over the parchment. One evening, Kaelin was preparing the volatile alchemical solutions required to activate the crystal's purification properties. Seraphina watched him from across the table, leaning her chin on her hand, her gaze intense. "You do not fear the end, Hunter," Seraphina murmured, her voice soft, devoid of her usual command. "You knew the cost of the resurrection ritual, your life, yet you moved forward. And now, you risk everything for my freedom, which is no reward for you." Kaelin looked up from his work, his hands stained with herb essences. "I feared failure, Seraphina, not death. My niece was taken because I failed to protect her. Success is redemption. Your sacrifice, your willingness to give up eternity for a clean soul, is the most noble act I have ever witnessed, immortal or mortal. If I can be the anchor that saves you, I accept the risk." Seraphina pushed herself off the table and walked toward him, stopping inches away. She raised a pale hand and brushed a smudge of dark soot from his cheek. The touch lingered, fragile and potent. "I am an agent of destruction, Kaelin," she whispered, her voice laced with self-contempt. "I have centuries of blood on my hands, thousands of lives taken. And yet, you speak of me as if I am capable of nobility. You are the only one who sees me not as a monster, nor as a queen, but as something capable of choosing light." "You are capable because you are choosing it," Kaelin countered, holding her gaze. "Malachi tried to force the darkness upon you. You chose to risk everything to defy that destiny. That choice is what matters, Seraphina, not the past." The air thrummed with a dangerous proximity. For a moment, it felt like the cold, hard walls of the castle vanished, leaving only the two of them, bound by blood, secrets, and a shared, terrible burden. Seraphina's focus dropped from his eyes to his neck, to the small, white scars where her fangs had pierced him. The sight stirred a palpable need, not for sustenance, but for connection. "The absolute sacrifice is not a quiet event, Kaelin," Seraphina warned, her voice thick. "It will drain me completely, reducing my life force to that of a newborn mortal. For a period, I will be utterly vulnerable, a fragile human tethered only to you. If the purifying essence fails to take hold, I will simply die. And you must remain focused. You must be the absolute anchor. Your will, your mortal life, will hold my dissolving soul in place." She reached out and closed her hand around the tear of the first morning. The crystal glowed blue, illuminating her features in an ethereal light. "This crystal will be the conduit. You must hold it, Kaelin. Your hands must be the last things I touch as I make the sacrifice. Can you bear the risk of holding my soul as it burns?" "I will hold you," Kaelin swore, his voice a steady rock in the turbulent night. He reached out and wrapped his hand around hers, enclosing the glowing crystal between their palms. The cold of the stone, the ice of her skin, and the warmth of his blood combined in a single, shared pressure. The pact was sealed. They were no longer queen and hunter, but two desperate souls facing an irreversible end. Only 17 nights remained before the blood moon. They had the materials, they had the resolve, and they had each other. Now, they only had to survive the next 2 weeks of preparation and the final, catastrophic moment of the sacrifice itself. The final 2 weeks leading up to the blood moon were characterized by a rising, palpable tension within the castle walls. The moon itself, though still weeks away from its zenith, seemed larger, casting a bruised, premature red glow upon the night sky. This proximity amplified Seraphina's powers, making her stronger and more volatile, but also feeding the deep-seated instincts of her kind. More dangerously, the growing power of the blood moon was also energizing the residual elements of the court who still clung to the notion of the Crimson Vow. Though Malachi was gone, the ideology of perpetual darkness was not. The remaining hardliners, including several ancient, powerful members who had only feigned loyalty, saw Seraphina's plan as a gross desecration of their heritage. Kaelin and Seraphina knew the Grand Altar, the chosen site for the absolute sacrifice, would be their most vulnerable point. It was located directly beneath the castle's highest spire, an open, circular chamber where the blood moon's energy would be most concentrated. One night, as they reviewed the defense plans, Seraphina's mood was dark, her impatience a palpable force. She used a small, carved piece of granite to represent the altar, and placed a tiny, crude stone figure of Kaelin beside it. "They will come for the crystal," Seraphina stated, her voice tight with controlled fury. "They want the absolute sacrifice to fail, forcing me onto the path of the vow. They believe the purity of the crystal is too great a temptation for the light." "The defense can't be reactionary," Kaelin countered, moving the stone piece to a side channel. "If they breach the throne room, the ritual is compromised. We need to cut off their access points before they even enter the main hall." Kaelin suggested utilizing the castle's older defense architecture. The Volkov line designed this castle to resist siege from the outside. But the internal corridors are just as vulnerable. There are two key bottleneck points leading to the Grand Altar, the Gallery of Whispers and the Stairs of Ages. We need to collapse one and flood the other. Seraphina's eyes gleamed with cold appreciation for the brutality of the plan. The Stairs of Ages lead past the old iron foundry. If we can reactivate the bellows and the furnaces, we can channel the steam and intense heat down the stairwell. It will not kill a vampire, but it will certainly incapacitate them long enough for us to deal with the threat. "Heat and steam are a distraction," Kaelin agreed. "But we need to collapse the Gallery of Whispers entirely. It's too wide and grants easy access to the altar. And for that, I need to get back into the cisterns." Seraphina shook her head sharply. "Too risky. The foundation is too unstable after the coup. And the master engineer's key is now locked away. We need another way to create a structural shock." Kaelin thought for a long moment, staring at the map. He remembered his early days, observing the ancient, heavy machinery of the castle. The old bell tower, it sits right above the Gallery of Whispers. The bell mechanism is massive, designed to be rung only on major ceremonial occasions. If I can destabilize the primary counterweight and force the largest bell, the Lament of Volkov, to fall, the kinetic energy alone would collapse the gallery roof. Seraphina looked at the plan. Ingenious, brutal, and entirely mortal. It required precision, agility, and a profound understanding of mechanics, not magic. "The bell tower is sealed," Kaelin, Seraphina warned. "It has not been opened in 3 centuries. But the plan is sound. Distract with heat, neutralize with collapse. The remaining court loyalists will likely include Lord Scythe, a master of illusions, and Lady Lyra, a powerful blood mage. They will not come for a fight. They will come for a strategic disruption." The following days were spent in grueling, secret preparations. Kaelin, operating now with the full resources of the castle, managed to find ancient schematics and tools. He risked the perilous ascent to the sealed bell tower, picking the elaborate, rusted locks and silently lubricating the enormous, medieval gears of the bell mechanism. He had to ensure that at the moment Seraphina gave the signal, a specific, controlled pulse of energy that only he would feel through the blood bond, the primary counterweight would release, sending the 1,000-ton bell crashing down. Seraphina, meanwhile, secured the iron foundry, directing loyal Strigoi to discreetly gather the necessary charcoal and water. She was protecting her future, using the most archaic, non-magical defenses possible, relying entirely on Kaelin's mortal cunning. The increasing danger, however, served only to deepen the strange bond between them. They were relying on each other for survival in a way neither had experienced. One night, as they rested briefly in his chamber, Seraphina reached across the map they were studying and gently took Kaelin's hand. "Your hands are strong, Hunter," she whispered, turning his calloused palm upward. "You are sacrificing your survival for my soul, and I am sacrificing my eternity for your niece. It is a pact forged in defiance. If we survive this, Kaelin, what will become of us?" Kaelin held her gaze, recognizing the raw, vulnerable question behind the queen's facade. "If we survive, Seraphina, you will be mortal, and I will have a niece to raise. We will both be free of the castle and its ghosts. That is the only promise we need to keep." Seraphina nodded slowly, but the look in her eyes suggested that the answer was not quite enough. The freedom Kaelin spoke of felt cold and distant. The present, the shared struggle in the shadows of the castle, was where their true, strange reality lay. They had 5 nights left. The blood moon was heavy in the sky, a final, glowing reminder of the immense risk they were about to take. The stage was set, the traps were laid, and the last line of defense was Seraphina's will and Kaelin's mechanical precision. The night of the blood moon's full power, the night of the absolute sacrifice, arrived with terrifying silence. The castle was empty, save for Seraphina, Kaelin, and a small cadre of hand-picked, trusted loyalists securing the perimeter. The atmosphere in the grand altar chamber was thick with arcane energy. The room was illuminated only by the light of the blood moon, which poured through the massive dome, casting a deep, ominous crimson glow on the altar. The tier of the first morning crystal sat on the basalt slab, humming with potent, contained power. Seraphina, dressed in a simple, unadorned white robe, looked impossibly pale, her eyes burning with resolute focus. Kaelin was positioned near the altar, holding the crystal, the anchor of her entire existence. The plan was simple. Seraphina would begin the complex purification ritual, channeling her immortal essence into the crystal. This process would leave her instantly vulnerable. Kaelin would monitor the external threat and execute the collapse of the bell tower the moment the dissenters initiated their attack. "I am starting the invocation, Kaelin," Seraphina whispered, her voice low and resonant, echoing through the chamber. "The moment I channel the essence, I will be defenseless. Be ready." Kaelin nodded, his gray eyes fixed on the heavy ceremonial doors of the throne room. He could feel the growing pressure in his temples, the psychic strain of the blood moon's magic and the intensifying warmth of the crystal in his hand. Seraphina began the chant. The language was ancient, guttural, and undeniably powerful. As the words flowed from her lips, the crystal in Kaelin's hand began to glow fiercely, absorbing the immense, corrupting power of her immortality. Seraphina closed her eyes, her body trembling as she forced the entirety of her vampire existence into the purifying light. The power surge was instantaneous. Kaelin felt a dizzying wave of coldness and ancient sorrow wash over him through their bond, the raw essence of Seraphina's soul demanding release. She was shedding centuries of darkness. At that exact moment, the attack came. It wasn't a frontal assault. It was a strategic, silent breach through the gallery of whispers, the very route they had planned to collapse. The heavy oak doors to the main hall burst inward, not with physical force, but with a powerful, concentrated burst of illusion magic. Lord Scythe, the master of illusion, stood at the head of a small, focused group of hardliners. He wasn't aiming for a fight, he was aiming to disrupt the ritual, to scatter the purification energy and force Seraphina into the vow. "Stop the ritual!" Scythe's voice was a triumphant roar. "Do not let her desecrate the blood moon." Kaelin felt the intense pulse of energy from Seraphina, her silent signal. Kaelin did not hesitate. He had to be fast. The main entrance was now breached, and Scythe's illusions were already weaving across the chamber, trying to confuse Kaelin and blind him to the critical mechanism. Kaelin sprinted out of the chamber, not towards the enemy, but towards the access point of the bell tower, which he had discreetly positioned outside the main doors. As he ran, the illusions began. The floor seemed to buckle, the stone walls warped into monstrous shapes, and the air filled with phantom screams. Kalen ignored the illusions entirely. He relied on his training and the subtle pull of his bond with Serafina to navigate the collapsing corridor. He reached the bell mechanism access point, a small, dark closet leading to the tower's interior. He climbed the internal ladder frantically. The air was thick with the dust of ages and the deep, low thrum of the massive, poised bell above him. He reached the counterweight mechanism, a series of immense, rusted gears and a single, massive iron pin holding the entire assembly in check. Below, he could hear the sound of the fight commencing, Serafina's guards engaging Side's faction. Kalen had to complete the sabotage now, before Side's illusions could find him. Kalen worked with desperate speed, using the specialized tools he had hidden. He inserted a strong, metal chisel beneath the heavy iron pin. He then drove a final, precise blow with a small, weighted hammer, a strike that had to be perfect to avoid shattering the whole mechanism prematurely. The iron pin snapped. The primary counterweight, an immense block of carved stone, dropped instantly. The 1,000-ton lament of Volkov Bell, freed from its anchor, began to swing violently, out of control. The sound was deafening, the sheer volume of the colossal instrument vibrating the very bones of the castle. Then the inevitable happened. The sustained kinetic energy, focused by Kalen's precise calculations, struck the weakened roof of the Gallery of Whispers. The stone structure gave way with a cataclysmic roar. The entire Gallery of Whispers, the main entrance for the dissenters, collapsed into a massive, choking pile of dust and rubble. Lord Scythe and his entire front line were instantly buried and neutralized. In the grand altar, the moment of impact was terrifying. The floor buckled and dust rained down, but the altar chamber, strengthened by ancient wards, remained intact. Serafina, still channeling her immortal essence into the crystal, gasped violently. The sudden, immense shock of the collapse did not break her concentration, but the physical strain was almost too much. Her body was racked with shivers, the purification nearing its final, most dangerous stage. Kalen stumbled back into the chamber, bruised, breathless, but triumphant. He looked at Serafina, her face drawn, her skin almost translucent, the crystal glowing blindingly in her hands. The threat was neutralized, but the ritual was demanding everything of her. Kalen, Serafina choked out, her voice barely a thread, filled with pain and absolute focus. The essence, it is complete. Take the crystal. But Kalen rushed to the altar. He gently took the intensely glowing tear of the first morning from her grasp, his hands stinging from the burning purity of the purified essence. Serafina's body seized. She pitched forward, collapsing directly into Kalen's arms. Her transformation was complete. She was no longer a vampire. Her immortal essence was contained within the crystal, ready to guide Kalen's niece back to the world of the living. Kalen held the weight of the collapsed queen, now a fragile, mortal woman, warm and impossibly vulnerable, in his arms, the crystal burning fiercely in his other hand. He had saved her throne, her soul, and secured the final key. The game was over. The price was paid. And Kalen's stone had survived the night. Kalen held the immense weight of the moment, physical and metaphysical, in his arms. Serafina, the former Blood Moon Queen, was now merely a fragile, warm weight against his chest, her heart beating a weak, mortal rhythm. The terror of her imminent transformation was replaced by the solemn duty of the final ritual. He gently laid Serafina down on the cold stone of the grand altar, ensuring her head was resting comfortably on the soft folds of her white robe. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful, the cruel, sharp edges of her vampiric beauty smoothed away by mortality. She was utterly vulnerable, tethered to this world only by the shared essence of Kalen's blood and his will. Kalen turned his full attention to the tier of the first morning crystal. It blazed with a fierce, blinding white-blue light that contained purity of Serafina's sacrificed immortal soul. This was the purified guide, the undone knot that would bring his niece, Ilara, back. He placed the crystal carefully on the center of the altar. He then retrieved the last, crucial components he had prepared, a silver locket containing a lock of Ilara's hair, and a small, vial of his own blood, drawn moments before he had ascended the bell tower. Kalen knelt before the altar, facing the fierce glow of the crystal. He spoke the final, binding incantations from the Mortis et Vita grimoire, his voice steady and resolute, powered by years of bottled-up grief and the fierce promise of redemption. Ego vinco, et redo animum. I bind and I restore the soul. He placed the locket of Ilara's hair next to the crystal, drawing the pure, concentrated energy of the purified essence to it. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he poured the vial of his own blood over the crystal and the locket. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. The crystal flared into a column of searing, focused white light that shot straight towards the domed ceiling. The grand altar chamber became an intense epicenter of concentrated life energy. Kalen felt a powerful, invisible force trying to wrench the life essence from his own body, the price of the ritual. He fought the drain with sheer will, anchoring himself to the cold stone and the promise he had made. He was the vital tether, holding the entire ritual stable, his mortal heart pounding a frantic counter-rhythm to the forces of life and death swirling around him. The light pulsed, then began to coalesce, focusing entirely on the silver locket. The energy subsided, flowing back into the crystal and the locket, leaving the air humming with residual power. The crystal dimmed, its light now a soft, gentle blue. The locket was warm to the touch. The ritual was complete. The resurrection was successful. Kalen collapsed, exhausted, beside the altar, the drain on his life force leaving him weak, but alive. He looked at the crystal, then at the locket, his mission finally fulfilled. He didn't have time to process the magnitude of his success. A new sound entered the chamber, the soft, confused breathing of a young girl. Lying on a low marble slab near the altar, in the space where she had been taken years ago, was Ilara. She was pale, dressed in the simple white gown she had worn when she vanished, but she was breathing, her small chest rising and falling. Her eyes fluttered open, wide and confused, looking up at the strange, crimson-lit ceiling. "Kalen?" she whispered, her voice frail but undeniably present. Tears, the first Kalen had shed in years, tracked clean paths through the soot on his face. He pushed himself forward, scrambling to his knees, embracing her in a fierce, protective hug. "I'm here, Zelaire. I'm here. You're safe. You're home." The shared, private moment of their reunion was the silent, absolute culmination of Kalen's impossible quest. He had paid the price, fought the monsters, and won. He looked back at the altar. Serafina lay motionless. Kalen picked up his now sleeping niece and carried her gently, moving toward the fragile, new mortal on the altar. Kalen knelt beside Serafina. He checked her pulse, weak but steady. Her breathing was shallow. She was a mortal woman now, fragile and completely dependent. He gently lifted her into his arms, pulling her white robe tighter around her frail body. As the first faint, gray light of the true dawn began to filter into the chamber, Serafina's eyes opened. The ruby glow was gone, replaced by a soft, clear amber color, the color of a fragile human soul newly restored. She looked at Kalen, her expression clouded with confusion, the memory of centuries erased by the absolute sacrifice. She looked at the strange, beautiful crystal, then at the sleeping girl in his arms. Who are you?" Serafina asked, her voice a soft, unfamiliar tremor. Where am I?" Kalen held the mortal woman, the former queen, closer. He had rescued his niece and saved Serafina's soul, but the ancient bond was broken, replaced by the vulnerability of two strangers in a ruined castle. "My name is Kalen," he said gently, looking into her newly mortal eyes. "And you are free. You are Serafina, and we are going home." The final act of their story was not a battle, but a choice. The choice to leave the darkness behind and step into the uncertain, shared light of a fragile new dawn.